Chapter 170. In fact, no one could have imagined that the 100 Nether Swords' return would pour oil over today's matters and cause them to completely explode. Between Qin Yu's eyebrows, the blood bead reflected the black sword. Within the deep red, there was a bit more black. Then, this black color spread out like ink. It turned into a palm-sized black hole that connected to some unknown place. A cold and gloomy aura flowed out, and one could faintly hear the howling of the wind, like the howls of the undead. In a small courtyard on the edge of the capital city, Commander Meng Li's new mistress, Lil Qing, was washing her body with a look of lingering fear. She thought that this place was as unclean as the rumors said, and she absolutely couldn't live here anymore. Once the old master returned, she would beg him to quickly change residences. Just as she was thinking about what method she could use to entice Commander Meng Li to agree, and then fantasize about her future residence, the smile on Lil Qing's face froze. Several gurgling sounds came from her throat, as if someone were grabbing her by the neck. She found it difficult to breathe. Kacha! Kacha! Ice appeared on the surface of the hot water that was washing her body. It began to condense at an astonishing speed. In the courtyard, within the deep well, the cold water began to boil. Bang! A black beam of light shot into the skies, like an invisible hand stabbing into the heavens of the capital city. But what was strange was that it didn't tear apart the spells of the capital city. Rather, the moment it touched them, it vanished from sight. Beneath this beam of light was a desolate land on the edge of the capital city. Gray fog covered the ground, making it impossible to see what was happening within. Now, this fog tumbled about, condensing into the phantoms of powerful sea monsters that reared their heads back and roared. The entire capital city was shaken by this sudden change. Countless sea folk looked up at this desolate land, their complexions gradually paling. Some old sea folk whispered with panic in their eyes, "The sea mausoleum, it's the sea mausoleum." They thought back to the calamity of the capital city in the past. 100,000 sea folk had died, and the smell of blood had covered the earth. This wasn't a secret at all. The sea folk that lived in the capital city knew something about it. Fear was like a plague, wildly spreading through the sea folk. At the main entrance of the royal palace, a bronze bell rang. The sea sovereign's complexion was grim. His eyes were deep like vortexes, and a boundless aura rose up. In the skies above the royal palace, the phantom of a flood dragon appeared. It was 10,000 feet long, with golden scales and purple eyes. Winds and clouds gathered, and the image of a flood dragon swam about, appearing and disappearing from time to time. Dragon roars rang out, and a horrifying dragon might spread out with the palace as the center. The panic in the capital city gradually subsided. They all knelt on the ground, kowtowing in the direction of the palace. In the great calamity of the past, it was also the sea sovereign who stepped forwards and sacrificed 1,000 years of his life to seal away the sea mausoleum. Beneath the 9-layer pagoda, Sutman's complexion paled. He mumbled, "Your Majesty." His face twisted and he roared out in a low voice, "What is going on? What the fuck is going on here?" Given His Majesty's condition, he could no longer make a move. Otherwise, the leakage of his strength would be detected, and heavenly tribulation would descend in an instant. He raised his head to look at the sky above the capital. Sure enough, there were already black clouds surging out. A brilliant and dignified aura caused all living beings to fall silent. That was the will of heaven and earth. If His Majesty had chosen to transcend tribulation and fight back then, he might have had a chance to survive. But now he had deceived the heavenly mysteries and would inevitably incur the wrath of heaven and earth. There was no way he could survive the heavenly tribulation. Soup Man wanted to stop His Majesty, but he knew that it was impossible. His Majesty would definitely attack. Motherf asterisk cur. Motherf asterisk cur. Motherf asterisk cur. Soup Man seemed to have gone crazy. He looked at the black clouds above his head and repeatedly cursed, his expression fierce. Without warning, the scene of a great calamity of life appeared in front of the people of the capital city. They stared with wide eyes, panic-stricken and helpless. They could only wait for it to arrive. Even within the royal palace, the most powerful king in the world had already prepared himself to die and seal away the sea spirit as the price. His eyes were faint without any fear at all. This was because this was his duty and responsibility as a king. Time slowly passed. But what was strange was that even though there was a great commotion, the calamity brought about by the aura of specters didn't occur. Besides the black beams of light that shot into the horizon and the rumbling sounds that followed, the capital city remained tranquil as before. The sea, sovereign, frowned. At this time, the doors to the hall were pushed open. Two officials rushed in with distressed expressions, waving their hands. "Your Majesty, please calm down. Your Majesty, please calm down. We have carefully investigated just now, and the sea mausoleum's spells are still running." The spirit shell in Sutman's chest began to ring out. He grabbed it and placed it by his ear, listening to it for a few moments. Then, the suffocating gloominess around him suddenly vanished. He looked up at the nervous old sea and nodded, his voice hoarse. "There is no problem with the sea mausoleum spells." He put away the spirit shell and looked up at the black beam of light, a puzzled look in his eyes. At the same time, this news spread to all sides in the shortest possible time. But like Soup Man, these sea folk all had the same question in their hearts. If there was no problem with the sea mausoleum spells, then what was happening right now? The spirit stones were pulled in by an invisible suction force, not a single one falling down. From a mountain, it gradually turned into a sphere that wrapped up the figure within. Thus, no one saw that the black hole between Chinyu's eyebrows suddenly trembled. Then a black torrent surged out. Outside Nine-Layer Building, Sutman's pupils shrank. He stubbornly stared at the giant sphere of spirit stones. The spiritual vortex roared and spun. Ordinary sea folk might not be able to sense it, but to him it was like a lantern in the dark night. The aura of the sea mausoleum. He slowly said, his eyes as sharp as blades. "Sealing do, just what is Honorable Ning doing?" As a purple card, a formidable soul was indispensable. Thus, when Old Sea sensed the sudden arrival of the aura, his complexion changed. First, there was the change in the sea mausoleum and the black beam of light that shot into the heavens. Now, the aura of the sea mausoleum had appeared here. He wouldn't believe that there wasn't a connection between the two. Old Sea took a deep breath and shook his head. Ever since he returned from the royal palace, he has gone into seclusion. I have no idea what he is doing, but I believe that he absolutely won't try to destroy the sea mausoleum spells. I can guarantee this. Sutman's complexion darkened. He coldly snorted, his eyes uncertain. If it were anyone else related to the changes in the sea mausoleum, he would have already moved to suppress them. Anyone that tried to threaten His Majesty should be destroyed. But it just had to be Ningqin. As he was considering what to do, the spirit shell sounded out once more. The sea sovereign's light voice echoed out from within. "Keep watching." Old Sea relaxed a little, but his complexion was still dignified. He bitterly smiled as he looked at the giant sphere of spirit stones. "Ningqin, Ningqin, you've stirred up a great deal of trouble this time." Within the black hole, the black torrent submerged Chinyu, fusing into his body through his pores. The formidable spiritual strength contained within surpassed the limits of his mortal body. His skin instantly cracked open like a broken porcelain doll. Before blood could flow out, it was shaken into a bloody fog by the formidable strength. Pipa! Pipa! His flesh and blood disintegrated. The 100 nether sword floated in front of the black hole. Only after the black torrent passed through it was it able to pour into Qin Yu's body. As it saw his miserable appearance, the sword subconsciously trembled. In comparison, it was currently incomparably nourished. The spectral aura carried by the black torrent had been cleanly swallowed up by it. It was like it was eating a delicious meal while watching Chinyu suffer a cruel torture. Of course, no matter what, the 100 Nether Sword would never admit this. It was only doing this in order to help its master overcome this difficult time. Otherwise, if it didn't absorb the spectral aura, its master wouldn't be able to withstand it. Yes, that was it. The 100 Nether Sword was instantly filled with righteousness. Within his Dantian Sea, the vortex of spiritual strength, the spirit stones, and the strength from the sea mausoleum all superimposed together. Finally, the requirements to condense the 5 elemental sources of magic power were met. White, black, blue, red, and yellow spheres of light swallowed up a massive amount of spiritual strength, gradually stabilizing. But as they continued to fuse and transform, the amount of spiritual strength they absorbed became increasingly greater. Even with Chinyu's powerful demon body, he was gradually unable to withstand it. His flesh and blood began to collapse faster and faster. Even his bones began to tremble and groan as cracks appeared on them. Blood fog was like a tide, gradually covering him. It dyed the surrounding spirit stones red, and some even floated into the black hole. Roar. A repressed roar echoed out from the black hole, filled with endless desire. Then, from the surging black torrent, a claw suddenly stretched out, grasping at Chinyu as if it wanted to pull him in. The 100 Nether Sword cried out. It cut down like a bolt of black lightning. The claw that stretched out from the black torrent was instantly cut apart and disintegrated. Within the black hole, the roar became pained, filled with unwillingness and anger. But with a cold and sharp sword cry, the 100 Nether Sword issued a warning. The roar gradually quieted down until it finally vanished from sight. The sword point turned towards Chinyu. The 100 Nether Sword was deep in thought. If it could make a human expression, it would definitely be one of worry and worry. If it didn't do anything, Chinyu would likely die. But if it did, it would consume a great deal of the strength it had painstakingly accumulated. Perhaps what it ate today wouldn't be enough. If that was the case, then this would be a massive loss. Aya, why was it that in this world there were always so many dilemmas? Whatever. As a sword that had a caring heart, a conscience, a sense of justice, and a sense of gratitude, it couldn't do something like stand idly by and watch someone die. Of course, it would definitely remember this debt. In the future, it would think of a way to slowly collect it back. The 100 Nether Sword lightly trembled. Black fog gushed out from the surface of the sword blade. It tumbled about as if it had a spiritual sense. It rapidly transformed into the phantom of an altar. If someone were to see this, they would discover that this pitch-black altar was quite similar to the one in Prosperity Square outside the royal palace that was used to offer sacrifices to the sea spirit. Of course, this similarity referred to the aura and some special characteristics, not just the surface. The blood fog was attracted over and rapidly settled deep within the altar. Then, a cross-legged figure gradually appeared within the phantom of the black altar. Then, countless threads grew out from the altar and drilled into the surrounding spirit stones. They were like the roots of a great tree. They absorbed the spiritual strength within the spirit stones and poured it into the altar, transforming it into a powerful life energy that was then poured into the figure deep within the altar. Thus, Chinyu's torn skin, torn flesh, and cracked bones began to wildly regenerate. Although they often ruptured and tore apart before they could fully grow, they were still able to maintain his mortal body so that it wouldn't collapse and be destroyed. Chapter 171. The team of 5 killer whales stopped in a place where they could see the capital city from afar. The woman had a dignified expression as she saw the black pillar of light that shot into the skies. Seventh Ani, what is that? After the young girl woke up, she didn't even have time to wash her face. She had a somewhat lazy expression, and a trace of excitement shined in her black and white eyes. The woman was a bit helpless, but she couldn't bear to blame her. She sighed and said, "Miss, this isn't something fun. If I'm not wrong, this black pillar of light should be related to the sea mausoleum." "Sea mausoleum?" The young girl blinked. It is a very sacred and also a very sinful place. If there really is a problem with it, I fear the capital city will suffer a calamity." The woman had a dignified expression. "At that time, I have no idea how many innocent people will be buried within." Seeing the young girl reveal a trace of fear, the woman smiled and patted her hand. "Miss, don't be afraid. If there is a problem, we can return to Sega City. Nothing will happen." The scout that had been sent to investigate the situation had a flustered look on his face. The woman's heart sank. She had already prepared herself for something bad to happen, but the truth was beyond her expectations. The young girl was stunned. She turned and said, "Seventh Auntie, is this Honorable Ning the person you spoke of? He seems to be a very bad person. He actually tore down our Sea Spirit Pavilion's capital city branch division." The woman forced a smile. "Miss is right. When we meet, I will definitely ask him why he tore down our 9-layer building." After a few comforting words, the woman waited for the young girl to hop away. Then her complexion darkened and a cold light flowed in her eyes. The guard captain walked over and sighed. "Something isn't right." The woman sneered. "Honorable Ning shouldn't have any malicious intent towards my Sea Spirit Pavilion. I fear that someone wants to use this matter to move against our Sega City." The guard captain shook his head. "It is too early to say such things. Moreover, this involves the Sea Mausoleum. I don't think anyone would dare to move against it." The woman thought for a moment. "What you say is reasonable. Then let's take a look first. But if it really is me, then don't blame me for being impolite." The killer whale's massive body was directly proportional to its astonishing speed. It soon arrived at the capital city. Facing the questioning of the capital city guards, the guard captain took out a token, and all the guards respectfully bowed. "The killer whale's body is too big and it is inconvenient to enter the capital city, so it is left outside the capital city in a marine pasture, specially for various large mounts." The leader of the guards took out the pink carriage from his storage conch. After the young girl and the middle-aged woman boarded the carriage, he led the guards into the royal city. At this time, in the opposite direction, there was also a group of soldiers silently approaching. The warriors on the wolf riders were incomparably tired, but their eyes were still cold and fierce. At a glance, one could feel the pressure coming from it. It was as if a giant wolf was about to pounce on them. The guards subconsciously tightened their grip on the weapons in their hands. Even though they still maintained the calmness and dignity that the guards of the capital should have, their faces turned pale. In front of them was a battle-hardened and terrifyingly powerful battalion. If they really fought, even though they looked exhausted, they would probably be able to kill all of them in a few moves. Shui Zheng sat up straight, his callous face without the least bit of expression. "Moon Praying Shrine's Wolf Rider Division, escort the vice priest to the capital city. Please let us pass." As he spoke, the several guards across from him began to shiver. That feeling just now was as if a vicious beast had locked onto them from the shadows, ready to tear them to pieces in the next moment. And what was especially terrifying was that they knew that this wasn't an intentional threat, but a natural aura that was emitted. The little leader gulped. He braced himself and said, "The capital city does not allow unknown battalions to enter. I need to verify your identities." Before he finished speaking, his words were destroyed by an indifferent glare. "Shui," Zhang slowly said, "where the wolf riders are is evidence in itself. There is no need to prove anything." Gently patting the mount, the giant sea wolf swept its eyes over the capital city guards with contempt and then stepped forwards. Behind it, the wolf riders slowly followed, escorting the carriage. To other tribes, the capital city might possess unsurpassed authority, but many years ago, Moon Praying Shrine had already clashed with the capital city several times. For them to exist to this day, That was enough to prove their strength. Naturally, they were able to maintain their pride and formidable self-confidence. The guards were oppressed by the aura. Although they wanted to stop them, it was as if their feet had taken root. They could only watch helplessly as the group entered the capital city. The little leader's face flushed red. He lowered his voice and roared, "Who cares about moon-praying shrine? This is the capital city. Immediately pass on the news and let the lords decide what to do." Shui Zheng's eyes swept over the black beam of light. He turned and approached the carriage. "Vice priest, do you need to rest first?" "We won't rest. We will go straight to see Spirit Pavilion." Moon-praying shrine had no respect for the capital city, but they couldn't help but acknowledge that this was the heart of the sea races, so they were quite familiar with the map of the capital city. Of course, if one wanted to ask whether or not this familiarity had some sort of disrespectful intent in it, then that would depend on the benevolent and the wise. 9-layer building could be considered a landmark in the capital city, and Shui Zheng knew where it was. The wolf riders changed directions and went straight ahead. Along the way, the sea folk all retreated, their eyes full of surprise. Most of them didn't know where such a valiant battalion had come from. But at this time, 9-layer building had already collapsed into ruins. Strong winds wrapped around it, causing dust to fill the skies. It no longer looked like a landmark at all. Chief Manager Wu didn't even have the strength to complain. At this time, no matter how many tears he had, they could only silently flow down in his heart. But looking at the situation, it seemed that today's events weren't normal. He hoped that Honorable Ning wouldn't provoke any trouble because of this. He looked up at Soup Man, who had a grim expression and was emitting an unfriendly aura. He whispered inwardly. Suddenly, an awe-inspiring feeling descended. It was like a sharp blade was pressing down on one's body, as if a mountain was covering one's head. It caused one's mind to tremble and instinctively feel a sense of dread. Chief Manager Wu fiercely looked up. He discovered that the skies above the capital city had darkened. Black clouds gushed out from nothingness and began to condense. This was heavenly tribulation. His eyes widened. Who was it that didn't want their lives anymore? They actually dared to cross tribulation in the capital city. Soup Man looked up, his eyes like blades as he locked onto the condensing tribulation clouds. He frowned for a moment before composing himself. The capital city didn't allow the sea folk to cross tribulation. Firstly, the power of heavenly tribulation would damage the capital city's restrictive spells, and secondly, if there was interference from the spells, the might of heavenly tribulation would greatly increase. Looking at the aura, this should be nascent soul tribulation. It wasn't easy to cultivate to this step, but were they stupid? Why would they do such a suicidal thing? Supman's mind raced for a moment before he composed himself. This was only a mere nascent soul. There were many powerhouses amongst the sea folk, so one dying wasn't anything at all. Right now, the only thing he was concerned about was the giant sphere of spirit stones in front of him. Even if it involved Ningqin and the sea mausoleum, he still needed a reasonable explanation. But as time passed, the tribulation clouds in the skies became increasingly thick. Gradually, it seemed as if they were coming towards this place. Supman's eyes fiercely jumped. He looked up at the tribulation clouds and then swept his eyes around. If he wasn't blind, then he could see that the tribulation clouds were moving towards the same target as him. Ningqin, Honorable Ning, he was crossing tribulation. Supman's heart instantly leapt into his throat. He nearly cursed out loud. It doesn't matter if you die, but don't cause His Majesty to be unable to save you. He clenched his teeth and stepped forwards. His figure shot into the skies, blocking between the tribulation clouds and the giant sphere of spirit stones. Even if he had to suffer a minor injury, he still had to block this heavenly tribulation. As if sensing Supman's actions, the tribulation clouds began to tumble. With a loud rumbling sound, lightning wreaked havoc as it came crashing down. Supman's complexion changed and immediately darkened. This heavenly tribulation, something was wrong. But at this time, he didn't have time to think about it. He stepped forwards, clenched his fist, and punched out at the thunder. There was a loud explosion like the crashing of a mountain. Thunder shattered and splashed out in all directions. Some unlucky fellows were struck and instantly fell to the ground, foaming at the mouth. Walala! The sea folk fled in panic. Supman's sleeves were torn, and there were many scorch marks all over his body. His neatly combed hair seemed to have experienced a violent storm, spreading out in all directions. Nascent soul, heavenly tribulation, normally had 3 bolts of thunder. Now this was only the first bolt, and yet its power had reached such a degree. Supman looked down and clenched his teeth in hatred. But the more it was like this, the more he couldn't retreat. He had to grit his teeth and swallow his blood to withstand this heavenly tribulation. Bang! The second bolt of thunder fell. Supman's entire sleeves turned to ashes, revealing a well-maintained and fair arm. But when combined with his eye-catching hair, it seemed particularly strange. He had lived his entire life in comfort and comfort. Even when he was young, he had never had the experience of making a fool of himself in front of everyone. If it weren't for the fact that his heart was strong enough to control his mood, he feared his face would have already turned red. That damned Ningqin! Bang! The third bolt of thunder. If the first 2 bolts of heavenly tribulation were like a sword that came from the east, difficult to resist, then this third bolt of heavenly tribulation was like a mountain pressing down on him. It was vast and mighty, filled with a dense aura of annihilation. Even someone as strong as Supman couldn't help but feel his heart race. He cursed out loud and then shot into the skies. It wasn't that he didn't fear heavenly tribulation, but because of the special nature of his cultivation method. Only then could he erupt with his greatest strength. Bang! Lightning splashed out, instantly submerging Supman's figure. But in the next moment he was sent flying backwards and smashed into the ground. A building that had been destroyed by the strong winds had been completely razed to the ground, and even the foundation had been ruthlessly torn apart. My family's ancestral shop. In the distance, the shop owner cried out in sorrow as he fell backwards. Bang! Bits and pieces of debris were sent flying away. Supman walked out with a gloomy face. If his long hair had been eye-catching before, it was now eye-catching to the extreme. This was because his hair was indeed an afro, and it was the most avant-garde and cool kind. As he spat on the ground, he walked towards the spirit stone sphere, his eyes filled with ill intent. Now that the heavenly tribulation has passed, you brat Ningqin, shouldn't you come out now? In my life it has always been me, old Supman, who has taken advantage of others. I have never suffered such a great loss before. I will clearly remember this debt, and we will slowly settle it in the future. As he walked, he accidentally tore a part of his body, causing a heart-wrenching pain. Old Supman stiffened. He forced himself to maintain a calm expression as he gnashed his teeth in hatred. Chapter 172. The heavens and earth were heartless, treating all living things as dogs. Well, this was a phrase that had been used all over the streets. But to a certain degree, this reasoning was correct. To the world, there were trillions of lives, and whether they were noble or lowly, there was no difference. But since it was described to a certain degree, there were clearly special exceptions. For instance, cultivators were a special group that received more love. Whether it was the righteous, demonic, monster, or evil, they all had a common understanding, and that was that the world had its own will. It was only because it was bound by the rules that it couldn't interfere with the revolution of the great Tao. This rule constraint could only be temporarily lifted at a special time, and that was heavenly tribulation. Cultivators that committed all sorts of evil, loved to kill, and loved to poison others would inevitably face formidable heavenly tribulation. Only a small number of people would be able to successfully cross it, and most of them would be turned to ash. This wasn't nonsense, but a truth that cultivators had discovered after experiencing tens of millions of lightning strikes. Thus, even the most vicious and evil of evil spirits wouldn't casually harm mortals. This was to avoid karma and death beneath tribulation thunder. Today, the 3 bolts of tribulation thunder were already abnormally strong. Superman had thought that Chinyu must have done something that angered the heavens and angered mankind, thus causing the world to punish him. But now, 3 bolts of heavenly tribulation had passed, and the tribulation clouds hadn't dissipated. Instead, they tumbled even more fiercely, and the terrifying pressure gradually increased. This was wrong. This was completely wrong. This could no longer be considered heavenly tribulation, but more like the will of the world itself. It was determined to kill Ning Qin on the spot, and such matters were only recorded in ancient texts. Superman never imagined that he would personally experience it. Thus he cursed out loud. This was because he couldn't imagine just how many evil deeds one had to commit in order to be rejected by the world. The tribulation clouds above the capital city grew larger and larger, casting down a massive shadow. Just being within them caused the hearts of countless sea folk to tremble as if they had fallen into an icy lake. Old Sea whispered, "Inevitable death tribulation. It's actually inevitable death tribulation." His eyes were filled with bitterness and complexity. "Superman, you cannot block this heavenly tribulation. Otherwise, even if you receive 3 more bolts, there will be more, and they will become increasingly strong. Only Ning Qin can pass this trial by himself." Superman paled. "Do you think I don't know? But you also saw the might of the heavenly tribulation just now. If I didn't act, then he would have died." He didn't say the following words, but the meaning was clear. If Ning Qin died, what would happen to His Majesty? Of course, this was indeed very realistic. Because, on the other hand, if His Majesty was fine, he wouldn't care how Ning Qin died. Old Hai shook his head. "There's no other way. We can only gamble. Otherwise, the further we go, the less likely it will be." Superman clenched his teeth. Rumble! The tribulation clouds roiled like a great tide, and the terrifying sound waves shook the world. Dazzling lightning swept out in all directions, and then the 4th bolt of heavenly tribulation descended. With just a glance, Superman's heart sank. Even if he were to attack this thunder, he might not be able to escape unscathed, much less Ning Qin. If he died, the glimmer of hope that His Majesty had would vanish. "You bastard!" Superman roared out, but it was unknown who he was targeting. As soon as the heavenly tribulation appeared and Superman intervened to block it, the countless sea folk watching had already fallen silent. They stared at the scene before them with wide eyes. However, no one had expected that after 3 bolts of tribulation lightning, it still hadn't ended. The aura of the 4th bolt of heavenly tribulation swept out. Countless sea folk paled. They looked at the giant sphere of spirit stones, their eyes filled with astonishment and pity. Poor Honorable Ning. Beneath such tribulation lightning, even a nascent soul realm existence might not be able to resist it. So how could he not die? At the same time, there were many sea folk that had pained expressions. They could only stare helplessly on as trillions of spirit stones were destroyed by heavenly tribulation. This was simply unacceptable. Chief Manager Wu was stunned. He looked at the tribulation thunder in a daze. Everything had been fine, so how had things suddenly developed to this step? Clearwood bit her lips, her face pale. Her mind was a chaotic mass, and she couldn't think of anything else. In the distance, in a tall building, there was an imposing figure standing tall. His black armor was like a mountain, and even though he didn't move, he seemed to be able to suppress the entire world. There were 7 or 8 sea folk in the building, most of them unfamiliar faces. They were scattered about. If there were sea folk that were familiar with the capital city here, they would discover that most of them were powerful tyrants, and one of them was even a key figure in the military. At this time, these sea folk slightly lowered their heads, expressing their respect to this truly great figure. There is definitely a problem with the companion vine. Although the royal palace has blocked off all news, it is still possible to detect it through all the changes. A fair-skinned sea folk with a soft and gentle temperament said in a soft voice, finding it hard to hide his regret, "What a pity this accident has already been resolved. Otherwise we might have been able to achieve our goal with the smallest possible price." He looked up, not daring to leap over the imposing figure's height. He looked towards the giant sphere of spirit stones in the air, his eyes full of praise. "Although I am angry, I cannot help but admit that this Honorable Ning is an extremely skilled person." A sea folk coldly sneered. "So what if he is skilled? In the end, he isn't one of us. Everyone from the Southern River office was taken away by the tax department, but the losses were all meaningless." The fat old man clenched his teeth. "It wasn't just the Southern River office that was lost, but also the assassins under my command." This was a familiar face. During the Great Sea Spirit Teacher Competition, he had accompanied Jing Guanjin the entire time. The assassins that had been exterminated by the Black Knights in the streets of the capital city had all been painstakingly trained by him. Of course, there were also the 2 people that had been killed by the royal palace guards during the chaos caused by the spirit stones. Someone stepped forward to stop the conversation. "That's enough. No matter what, he will die." These words caused the complexions of the people in the room to relax. They subconsciously let out sighs of relief. He was like a predestined nemesis. Ever since Ning Qin appeared, nothing had gone smoothly for them. Not only had they spent a great deal of time and effort preparing for the Great Sea Spirit Teacher Competition, but they had also lost Jing Guanjin and Wu Zetian. The situation in the royal palace had taken a turn for the better, but he had interfered and ruined it, causing the Southern River office to be exposed. There was also a series of hidden disturbances and shock waves. Presumably, as time passed, the number of people who died would continue to increase. Now he was finally going to die. But what a pity! The wonderful situation they had been waiting for all these years had been lost. Thinking of this, the sea folk in the room were filled with helplessness. Their eyes fell on the tall figure in front of the window. Everyone quickly calmed down. Although he hadn't said a single word, he was like a boulder in their hearts. As long as he was here, there would be a chance. Sooner or later, they would succeed. Their eyes turned a little, and they could clearly see the face of the figure in front of the window. Set off by his black armor, he exuded a powerful aura like that of a heavenly god. This was another familiar face. If Qin Yu could see this, he would remember the powerful existence he had seen during his conflict with Princess Lushy. The whale's sovereign. Standing in front of the window, this person who had packaged himself well and was the cornerstone of the nation in the eyes of countless sea folk was currently frowning. But unexpectedly, Jing Guanjin's failure, Wu Zetian's loss of the purple card, the chance to obtain the companion vine, the loss of the Southern River office, he hadn't thought about any of these things. This was because, in the whale sovereign's opinion, changing the heavens and earth was difficult to begin with. Any accidents or failures were normal. What he was thinking was why this Honorable Ning Qin, Honorable Ning, gave him an inexplicable sense of loathing and familiarity. Others might not care about this sort of feeling, but after his cultivation reached this step and he had nearly formed divine soul, he could faintly sense this. Unfortunately, he was about to die. Beneath such a powerful heavenly tribulation, his body and soul would likely turn to ash. There was no way for him to investigate anything. At this time in the capital city, everyone that had gathered here believed that Honorable Ning would die. This was because heavenly tribulation didn't care about anything else, only absolute strength. The whale sovereign thought this, Soup Man thought this, Old Sea thought this, and even the 2 squads that had arrived at around the same time. The young girl pushed open the window. Her eyes widened in surprise as she looked at the heavenly tribulation falling down from the tribulation clouds. She could feel the annihilating aura it emitted and subconsciously shrank her neck. She whispered, "Seventh Auntie, is the one crossing tribulation Honorable Ning?" The woman's complexion darkened. She squeezed out a smile and nodded. Things had changed beyond her expectations. Honorable Ning was actually crossing tribulation, and it was the legendary death tribulation, borrowing Honorable Ning's momentum. Sea Spirit Pavilion's recent momentum had skyrocketed. It seemed as if they were going to climb to the top in a single swoop. Now, they would surely suffer heavy losses, and they might even have to face the counterattack of other sea spirit influences. The young girl didn't know what sort of difficulties her family would encounter. She only looked at the Spirit Stone Mountain and sighed. This Honorable Ning was truly rich, but at the same time, she felt pity for him. Perhaps the most painful matter in the world was to have endless wealth, but not have the life to spend it. Shuijing frowned for the first time. A cold and harsh, killing aura swept out like a wave of ice, rapidly clearing away the surrounding sea spirits. The sea spirits were all panic-stricken. Where did this person come from? His aura was so terrifying. Within the carriage, the vice priest's eyes were dim and bitter. He had originally thought he had seen a glimmer of hope, but who would have thought that his gamble would lead to such a result? Was it fate that made a fool out of them, or was it predestined that Moon Praying Shrine's destiny had come to an end? The white-dressed woman's eyes were filled with sorrow. She opened her mouth, wanting to comfort him, but she discovered that her heart was in chaos and she didn't know what to say. She looked past the window and at the giant sphere of spirit stones. Moon Praying Shrine's hope was right there within reach. But in the end, it had come too late. The fourth heavenly tribulation brought with it an aura of annihilation. Like this, it crossed the world and arrived. Just as it was about to touch the spirit stone, it suddenly vanished from sight. This was normal. Heavenly tribulation couldn't be avoided, unless external karma interfered, such as Soup Man receiving the heavenly tribulation. Then no matter where you hid, it would be able to cross all barriers and descend upon you. What followed next should be a splendid display of fireworks. A cultivator cultivated to defy the heavens and change their destiny. They absorbed the spiritual strength of the heavens and earth into their body, transforming it into their cultivation and strength. When a cultivator died beneath heavenly tribulation, an invisible would descend, returning everything to its origin and fusing back into the world. In other words, a cultivator's cultivation and magic power would be restored to spiritual strength. This process was extremely beautiful and breathtaking. Thus it was called fireworks. Of course, these fireworks represented the violent death of a tribulation seizing cultivator every time. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call them the saddest fireworks in the world. 1 breath of time passed. 2 breaths of time passed. 3 breaths of time passed. It was calm as ever. Chapter 173. Soupman frowned. It wasn't that he was unhappy or disgusted, but that his expectations were far too different from reality, causing his emotions to overflow. He soon reacted. This heavenly tribulation seemed to have been blocked. Before he could think of the reason, a smile bloomed on his face. Soupman even felt as if he had escaped death. But after a breath of time passed, he discovered that something was wrong. Where was the 4th heavenly tribulation? After touching the spirit stone sphere, it suddenly disappeared and then there was no more movement. How was this possible? Was it because he was too nervous that it caused him to hallucinate? He turned his head and saw Old C's eyes widen and his mouth open. This wasn't an illusion. Whoosh! The sea folk surrounding 9-layer pagoda were in an uproar. All of them had shocked expressions as they spoke to the sea folk around them. For instance, they said, "Am I seeing things? Am I dreaming?" Then they determined that this was reality, a reality that had occurred right in front of their eyes. A heavenly tribulation, an extremely powerful heavenly tribulation that could even severely wound a nascent soul, had inexplicably vanished. The sea folk of the capital city considered themselves to be experienced and knowledgeable. Their vision was at the peak of the sea region, but this sort of matter was simply unheard of. Rumble, rumble. Without giving the sea folk time to think, The black clouds in the skies above the capital city erupted with radiant lightning. The fifth heavenly tribulation came crashing down. It seemed to feel some sort of provocation or even threat. The tribulation thunder was no longer in the form of pure thunder. Rather, it condensed into a war axe that cut down with the power to split apart the heavens and earth. As this heavenly tribulation cut down, even though it was far away, it still caused the hearts of countless sea folk to shrink and their scalps to tingle. Fear gushed out from the depths of their souls, unable to be contained. Even someone as powerful as Superman felt his heart skip a beat. His eyes widened as he watched it approach the spirit stone sphere and vanish from sight. Then there was nothing. Then it was a strange silence. No one knew how to explain the current situation. Heavenly tribulation. To cultivators, this was the most terrifying heavenly tribulation. Yet it disappeared one after another. Countless sea folk groaned inwardly, "Are you lost?" This was, of course, only a senseless joke. But at this time, the sea folk felt as if their brains had turned to mush. They simply didn't know how to think. "So powerful!" the young girl exclaimed, her blue eyes filled with amazement. The woman was shocked. She glanced at the guard captain, both of them able to feel the shock in each other's hearts. This honorable Ning was actually even more unfathomable than the information they had received. Within Moon-Praying Shrine's carriage, the white-dressed woman wept tears of joy. Across from her, the vice priest clenched his fists, his face flushed red with excitement. The priest had made the right bet. This honorable Ning was truly an unrivaled character. If he were to help, then the Saint Flower would absolutely have a chance of being reborn. The fourth and fifth heavenly tribulation disappeared, and the dark clouds above the capital city fell silent. Just as many sea folk thought that it was brewing up a terrifying ultimate move, chaotic fluctuations appeared in the dark clouds. As if sensing some sort of threat, the sixth heavenly tribulation hurriedly fell down. The arm-thick thunder was far inferior to the first heavenly tribulation, and it vanished in the blink of an eye. This situation, no matter how they looked at it, it seemed as if the heavenly tribulation had been scared away. Many sea folk thought of this and were immediately frightened. They quickly suppressed this thought and thought that they were overthinking things. This was heavenly tribulation. So how could it possibly be scared away by a cultivator? Yes, they were definitely overthinking things. Although they told themselves this in their hearts, they still couldn't help but look at the spirit stone sphere, a deep awe in their eyes. 6 heavenly tribulations. Well, although the last one was clearly a bit suspicious, there was no problem with it. 6 heavenly tribulations had passed. Honorable Ning, shouldn't you show yourself? But after waiting for a while, and then waiting for a while longer, his neck was sore. The spirit stone sphere was still as before, without any signs of disintegrating. Superman frowned. His mind was filled with questions, and he needed an explanation. But every time the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back down. With things having developed to this step, no one knew just what he was doing. If he were to rashly disturb him and cause a bad result, that wouldn't be what he wanted. Superman took a deep breath and calmed his thoughts. He narrowed his eyes, his face expressionless. Just wait. I don't believe you can hide inside and hibernate. Like this, moment after moment passed. Just as the sea folk were beginning to feel bored, the sky suddenly turned a vast expanse of white, and the wind wildly danced in the air. It was snowing? The sea folk were all dumbfounded. This didn't make sense. Rain, snow, these were things that could only be felt in the lowly human world. How could they possibly appear in the capital city? This was the seabed. Spirit, spirit, spirit stone. It was unknown who cried out in alarm, but his voice was sharp and grating, filled with sorrow and pain. Then this pain spread to all the members of the sea folk who saw the scene. Floating in the air, the sphere formed from countless spirit stones began to disintegrate from the surface, as if it were a stone that had been weathered for countless years. White powder flew into the air, sprinkling down to cover the skies. In just several breaths of time, the streets, buildings, and courtyards were all covered in a layer of white powder. The impact of this scene caused the sea folk to freeze in place. The white powder dyed their hair, beards, and even draped them in white robes. The spirit stones continued to disintegrate, and disintegrate. The giant sphere began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye. Layer after layer was cold and grim. Many sea folk were stunned, tears falling down their chests. Money, so much money. It was gone just like that. Although it wasn't theirs, it was still so painful that they found it hard to breathe. Then, raging flames of anger ignited in their chests. Bastard, if you don't want them, you could have given them to me. Why did you have to destroy them? My lovely spirit stones, my lovely spirit stones. The higher-ups were experienced and knowledgeable, so they were able to wake up a step earlier. Although their eyes were complex, they gradually calmed down. Faintly, a vague thought appeared in their minds. Was the sudden disappearance of heavenly tribulation related to these spirit stones? Among them was Soupman. He had dealt with money his entire life, so there was no doubt about his eyesight. With just a glance, he could estimate that there were at least 300 million spirit stones. Such a heaven-shaking amount of spirit stones contained a boundless and unimaginable amount of spiritual energy, let alone Ning Qin. Even he or his majesty wouldn't be able to absorb and exhaust all of their strength in such a short period of time. Thinking of this, everything had a reasonable explanation. Soupman's heart began to race. If, hypothetically speaking, Ning Qin had a way to borrow the power of spirit stones to counteract heavenly tribulation, then could he do the same and help his majesty cross heavenly tribulation? He knew that this was a bit of an assumption, and with the disparity in cultivation, Ning Qin needed 300 million spirit stones to resist heavenly tribulation, while his majesty needed 3 billion or even 30 billion spirit stones. But as long as there was hope, even if he had to empty out the royal palace's treasury, squeeze out all the wealth from the royal family, or even pawn off his pants, he would still give it a try. Soupman sucked in deep breaths, barely restraining the excitement in his heart. Right now, his mind was filled with this matter. Even the sudden appearance of the sea mausoleum's aura had been tossed to the back of his mind. If his majesty could smoothly cross tribulation, then that would simply be unimaginably wonderful. From Soupman's burning hot eyes, Old Sea could guess what he was thinking. He sighed inwardly, a bit worried. After all, there were too many implications to this matter. Even he didn't dare to judge just what the result would be. However, after a while, when the curtain was lifted, Old High realized that his worries were unnecessary and meaningless. More and more spirit stones disintegrated, and the sphere rapidly shrank. When there was only 100 feet left, faint traces of blood fog appeared after the spirit stones disintegrated. Then, more and more blood fog gushed out, weaving together and covering the final region. After several breaths of time, when the last bit of spirit stone powder fell down, what greeted everyone's eyes was a mass of blood fog that was 70 to 80 feet wide. It expanded and contracted as if it were breathing, as if it were following the rhythm of a heartbeat. As time passed, its volume constantly shrank. 50 to 60 feet, 40 to 50 feet, 30 to 40 feet. Gradually, a blurry figure appeared from the blood fog. Even though it was only an approximate outline, it was enough for those familiar with it to recognize who it was. It was Ning Qin. Soupman narrowed his eyes. He looked at the blood fog that was constantly being sucked back into his body. He thought that this was because of his cultivation method, so he didn't care too much about it. But soon, a strange expression appeared on his face. Then it became increasingly heavy, causing his eyes to widen with shock and disbelief. It wasn't just Soupman. Old Sea, Chief Manager Wu, Clearwood, and even more sea folk looked at the blood fog with stunned expressions. The blood fog became increasingly thin, gradually revealing the figure within. The black robes that accompanied him seemed to be torn apart by some unknown strength. At this time, it hung on his body in tatters. Thus, Honorable Ning Qin's true appearance was revealed to the outside world for the first time. Originally, the sea folk were only secretly excited to see Honorable Ning's true appearance. But as the blood fog thinned, they gradually revealed looks of surprise. Honorable Ning seemed too similar to a human. Whether the sea folk had a high cultivation or had transformed into a human through the transformation pool, they would always retain some characteristics of their tribe. For instance, the scales between Princess Lushy's eyebrows or the astonishing defensive turtle shell that Gudra possessed. This was the difference between the sea folk and humans. But Honorable Ning's body was far too clean. Clean to the point that there wasn't the slightest trace of him belonging to the sea folk. Moreover, his soul and consciousness were isolated from his mortal body, making it impossible for him to perfectly restrain his aura. As the concealment of the outside world faded away, the pure aura that was different from the sea folk began to appear in the capital city. Human, Honorable Ning, the third holder of the purple card, the legendary spiritual bestower, the formidable existence that had triggered the sea spirit baptism for 10 hours, was a human. The impact of this knowledge was even more astonishing than the 300 million spirit stones that had turned to powder. Thus, all the sea folks' jaws dropped open, their minds thrown into disarray. In a distant building, the black-armored whale Sovereign stood in front of a window. As everyone was shocked into silence, he revealed a satisfied smile. "No wonder, so it was you." Bang! The window collapsed. Like a bolt of black lightning, it cut through the void. The whale Sovereign's eyes were indifferent, without the least bit of warmth. His killing intent soared to the heavens. It was true that he could accept those defeats and didn't care about them, but that didn't mean that he wouldn't be angry. In particular, the target was a little insect that had once threatened him and left him helpless, allowing him to smoothly escape. So he wanted to kill someone. Chapter 174. At this moment, Supman's heart was filled with regret. If he knew this would happen, he would have already taken Ning Qin away. Whether it was the sea race or the human race, he was shocked, but he didn't care. As long as he could help His Majesty, what did this matter? But now, in front of everyone's eyes, Honorable Ning had transformed into the human race that the sea races had always despised and viewed with hostility. It would be difficult for such an explosive matter to be easily forgotten. As his thoughts raced, Supman's complexion changed. He turned around, his eyes reflected in the black armor. His aura was like a surging tide that shook the heavens and earth, his voice breaking through the air. His steps didn't seem fast, but every step he took seemed to shorten the space between them. In reality, he was extremely fast. Before his pupils could shrink, Supman shouted out loud, "Capture this person and force him to reveal Honorable Ning's whereabouts." This explanation was clearly not convincing. As long as one wasn't blind, they would be able to tell that this human before them was Ning Qin. But at this time, Supman didn't care about how bad his excuse was. He needed to control Qinyu in his hands and preserve his life. As he turned and stepped out, Supman blocked his way. He smiled and cupped his hands together. "Greetings, Whale Sovereign." Beneath the black armor, his face was calm and indifferent. He glanced over and said, "You want to protect him?" Supman coughed. "I only wanted to capture him and rescue Honorable Ning." The Whale Sovereign was silent for a moment. Then his lips curled up in a smile. "Supman, I haven't seen you for several years, and your skin has become even thicker. But today he must die." Supman straightened himself and lightly said, "Thank you for the praise. This human must die, but before that, I must first find Honorable Ning." The Whale Sovereign didn't speak further. He stepped forwards. This stomp was like a star falling into the ocean, and it instantly gave rise to tempestuous waves that swept out in all directions in a domineering and formidable manner. Supman took a deep breath, and his chest puffed out. Facing the Whale Sovereign's attack, he didn't retreat at all. He raised his hand, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth surged. It rumbled endlessly as he slapped forward. He chose to make the first move. A trace of appreciation flashed in the whale sovereign's eyes. After all, in this world, there were very few people that dared to stand in front of him and attack him. It was no wonder that His Majesty valued him so highly. He clenched his fist, bent his arm, and swung it out. The whale sovereign's ordinary fist didn't gather any potential or use any fancy moves. When his fist struck out, it was silent and silent. But when his fist fell, a volcano erupted, all of its strength gushing out. Bang! His voice was like a clap of thunder as a violent gale swept through. The remaining buildings were instantly razed to the ground by the dozen or so vortexes. Soupman felt as if he had suffered a heavy blow. He drew back again and again, his face flushed red like blood. Then, in the next moment, he paled. The palm he struck out hung by his side, trembling slightly. Traces of blood flowed out from the tiny cracks, converged and dripped down. The whale sovereign's voice was faint. "I am the protector of the capital city, and it is my duty to kill this human who has secretly infiltrated the sea mausoleum. If you continue to obstruct me, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Soupman, you are one of His Majesty's people, so I will give you a chance. Step aside." Beneath his powerful and overbearing appearance was a powerful heart that didn't leak anything. He was well aware of Soupman's character and knew that he wouldn't back down. This sentence was only for the sake of righteousness, or to find a reasonable reason to kill. Killing Chin Yu was killing him, and killing Soupman was also killing him. Moreover, he had long since felt that this loyal and devoted old dog was an eyesore. Soupman spat out a mouthful of bloody spittle. The whale sovereign lightly said, "If so, then I will help you." With a flick of his sleeves, a giant blue handprint appeared. It came crashing down from above, pressing down like a mountain. Soupman wildly laughed. Blood flowed from his nose and mouth. He forcefully stimulated all of his strength, but he was no longer able to suppress the injuries within his body. He stepped forwards and shot into the skies, punching out at the giant blue handprint. Time seemed to come to a standstill. After a brief silence, a terrifying sound spread out. Soupman's body ruthlessly smashed into the ground, tearing it apart and forming a terrifying pit. He lay at the bottom of the pit, his body covered with wounds. Blood flowed out, soaking the ground beneath him, gradually turning it crimson. The giant blue handprint gently trembled. Then it collapsed, disintegrated, and vanished from sight. The whale sovereign furrowed his eyebrows, but in the next moment he composed himself and stepped forwards. Since his first strike hadn't been able to kill Soupman, he disdained to attack a second time. Of course, this was only the whale sovereign's state of mind. That person in the royal palace was still alive. Thus, there were still restraints placed on him. The young girl's eyes widened as she saw this, shocked. The woman beside her had a deep look of worry in her eyes. The guard captain turned and smiled. Then his figure flickered, and he appeared in front of the whale sovereign. "Seventh uncle." The young girl cried out in alarm. The woman pursed her lips. "Whether it is a human or sea race, Honorable Ning is still a part of Sea Spirit Pavilion. This is your seventh uncle's responsibility." Almost at the same time, the vice priest in the carriage shouted out, "Stop him!" On the back of the sea wolf, Shuezheng straightened his body. No one could see his movements before his figure vanished. When he reappeared, he was standing side by side with the guard captain. There was no eye contact. As long as the two of them were determined to protect Ning Qin, that was enough. The whale sovereign's eyes flashed. "See Spirit Pavilion's seventh night sky. I can understand why you want to help. After all, he is still a part of Sea Spirit Pavilion. But what about you? Moon-praying shrines wolf riders. Why are you interfering?" Shuezheng had an indifferent expression. He faced the whale sovereign. Even if he didn't have the least bit of confidence in his heart, his eyes were still firm. He frowned at the question, but didn't respond. For a human, you dare to make an enemy of me? That is a crime worthy of death. The whale, sovereign, slowly said. In the next moment, his eyes turned sharp. Space violently twisted, covering the three people in a blur. No one could clearly see just what was happening. 3 breaths of time later, the guard captain of Sea Spirit Pavilion, the man named Seventh Night Sky, was sent flying backwards. The clothes on his chest had been torn to pieces, revealing a terrifying purple palm print. After another 4 breaths of time, Shuezheng stumbled out of the distorted space. There were countless wounds on his body, some of them deep to the bone, and blood gushed out. In 7 breaths of time, he had defeated 2 nascent soul powerhouses. Whether it was Seventh Night Sky or moon-praying Shrine's Wolf Riders, they were both synonymous with absolute strength. The Whale Sovereign's formidable strength had been revealed to all. Your name is Shuezheng, right? The Whale Sovereign had a look of praise in his eyes. I have heard of your name before. You are far more brilliant than the rumors say. Submit to me, and I will grant you a new life. Shuezheng's eyes were indifferent, as if these terrifying wounds weren't on his body. With a loud shout, blood gushed out from his body. Billowing blood fog condensed above his head, forming the phantom of a blood wolf. It reared its head back and howled, turning into a stream of blood-red light. The Whale Sovereign shook his head. Stubborn fool. Bang! The blood-red light disintegrated. The blood wolf cried out miserably as its body disintegrated. Shuezheng was sent flying backwards. The sounds of bones breaking rang out, making one's scalp tingle. The Whale Sovereign looked up. His eyes fell on Qinyu, and the corners of his lips curled up. Junior, are you called Qinyu or Ningqin? Of course. None of this is important. What is important is that we finally meet again. Shua. Qinyu opened his eyes. The Whale Sovereign didn't speak any further. He had already wasted too much time, so he might as well end things earlier. He lifted a hand towards Qinyu and clenched his fingers. Qinyu had just regained control of his mortal body, but he could sense everything that occurred in the outside world. Facing the Whale Sovereign's clenched hand, his heart violently shrank, as if it would explode at any moment. His face paled uncontrollably, but his expression remained calm, like a silent stone. In the face of death and despair, he maintained his calm and indifference, and then he launched his own counterattack. Many years ago, in the deepest depths of a pool, he had obtained the demon blood he needed to cultivate the demon body. There were also some scenes that were branded into his mind, never to be forgotten again. At this time, these scenes flowed through his mind. In a trance, he seemed to see the demonic phantom that towered into the heavens above the earth, as well as that finger that descended from the highest heavens. Thus, Qinyu lifted his hand and pointed forward. A terrifying extraction occurred. Even with his current cultivation, his field of vision darkened and he felt dizzy. Within his Dantian sea, the 5-colored golden cores began to dim. A finger appeared. If one looked carefully, they would discover that it was both similar and different from Qinyu's hand. The fingerprints on its surface wove together in a chaotic manner, as if they came from chaos. They seemed to follow the rules, but at the same time, they didn't obey the rules. Thus, it was able to reverse the rules, able to go from weak to strong. Rumble, rumble. A massive amount of heaven and earth, spiritual strength, crazily poured into the finger. In the wind, it grew until it was over 10 feet long. A gust of wind blew, and the clouds rolled back and forth. A finger of wind and clouds rose. A finger of the boundless blue changed. The Whale Sovereign's eyes brightened. His fingers clenched into a fist, and he ruthlessly punched forwards. In the next moment, his body shook. The Whale Sovereign, who had been looking down on him ever since he broke through the window, finally took a step back. And in order to accomplish this, Qinyu had to pay a price. His finger had exploded, revealing the pale, white bone beneath. With every step he took back, there was a cracking sound in his chest. It was the sound of bones breaking. Perhaps in the eyes of the sea folk, this was a display of the whale sovereign's incomparably powerful strength. But even someone as strong as Soup Man could only be rolled over in front of him. Yet, Qin Yu had actually forced him back a step. Those who were able to see this clearly were all secretly shocked by the power of this finger. But being shocked was only being shocked. Their eyes were still filled with pity. If the whale sovereign wanted to kill someone, who could stop him? A terrifying aura that could topple mountains and overturn seas rushed in from all directions. In just the blink of an eye, Qin Yu would be erased. Humph! Whale sovereign, you want to kill my guest. Aren't you looking down on me a bit too much? A cold shout echoed through the capital city. A figure suddenly appeared. Although this figure was thin and withered, he was like a mountain blocking out all aura. He wore a thick tortoise shell. But at this time he didn't seem comical at all. His once wretched face was now solemn and dignified. Qin Yu relaxed a little. This was the old turtle that had brought him to the sea race capital city. With his strength, he should be able to contend with the whale sovereign. His life had been saved for now. The whale sovereign frowned. Turtle origin. The old turtle sneered. Whale sovereign, what great prestige you have. The whale sovereign narrowed his eyes. Today, I am here to kill a human spy. If you stop me, that will be a violation of the oath we made when we became the capital city's protector. Aren't you afraid of a backlash from that oath? Humph! Don't try to use that oath to scare me. I already said that this junior is my guest. The old turtle swept his eyes around and suddenly pointed a finger. Brat Mengli, when I brought Qin Yu back to the capital city, I left him in your care. Now, tell the whale sovereign whether or not he is my guest. Meng Li stiffened and his face paled. The truth was that when Qin Yu revealed his true appearance, he had already paled. Only when he saw the whale sovereign's unstoppable attack did he calm down a little. He never imagined that he would be caught by the old turtle without any preparations and used as a witness to confront the whale sovereign. The thought of I should faint flashed through his mind. Over the years he had spent in the sea of officials, this move had helped him avoid several crises. But today he only thought about it for a moment before immediately suppressing this thought. Looking at the chill in Mr. Turtle's eyes, if he fainted now, there was a high chance he would never wake up. Chapter 175. Re-reporting to Whale Sovereign. What Mr. Turtle said is true, stammering and trembling with fear. Meng Li almost cried when he finished speaking. It's over, it's over. I've been playing all sorts of tricks in my life. Fawning and currying favor with her is nothing difficult. But today I've completely failed. He had offended the whale sovereign. Although the sea region was vast, Commander Meng Li found it difficult to even breathe. Old Tortoise nodded in satisfaction. His eyes swept across the room. Did you hear that? If I say he's my guest, then he must be. What else do you have to say? The whale sovereign furrowed his eyebrows. In front of him, he had always been as calm as a mountain, callous and overbearing. But that didn't mean that he didn't know when to advance or retreat. Perhaps in terms of absolute strength, he was stronger than the old turtle. But in order to determine victory or defeat, they would have to engage in a life or death battle. The price would be far too great, and the ripples would be too great. A thought of retreating appeared in his heart. After all, now that he had determined that Qin Yu was Turtle Origin's guest, he finally had a way out. If he left after saying a few words, it wouldn't be shameful. In fact, it would give others the impression that he was considering the overall situation. At this time, he glanced at Qin Yu from the corner of his eyes. He was frowning at him, and their gazes collided without warning. At this moment, the whale sovereign's heart shrank, and an inexplicable sense of fear rose in his heart. A thought immediately rose up in his mind. If this Qin Yu wasn't killed in time, that would be raising a tiger that would invite calamity. Before, It was said that those that had nearly reached divine soul had extremely accurate senses. This intense sense of crisis caused the whale sovereign's killing intent to rise. Qin Yu's heart chilled. Just as he was about to lower his head, the whale sovereign's eyes brightened. They were like two sharp arrows that pierced through the air. With a stuffy cough, Qin Yu closed his eyes. Blood flowed down from between his eyes, and what was even more terrifying was that his soul felt as if it had been pierced by an arrow. If it weren't for him refining the 5 elements spiritual objects and recklessly increasing his soul force recently, this strike might have taken his life. As the pain was unbearable, Qin Yu subconsciously thought of something. If the whale sovereign had such a powerful divine sense attack, then why didn't he do anything when he held Princess Lushy hostage? Perhaps there was only one answer. He had tacitly allowed the incident to happen. The old turtle angrily shouted, "Whale sovereign!" Bang! A monstrous aura burst out of his body, and a roar suddenly sounded in the void above his head. The image of a giant turtle appeared, towering like a mountain. The whale sovereign looked up. A tyrannical strength erupted from him. Like an invisible hand, it disturbed the order of space. In a blur, the shadow of a giant whale emerged, swinging its giant tail and stirring up a torrential tide of spiritual power. A tortoise and a whale. 2 colossal beings stood facing each other from a distance. Even though they were only phantoms, they represented the two's true power. The collision of shapeless auras caused space to collapse ceaselessly and reveal numerous rifts of various sizes. This was the shattering of space. In the legends, only a divine soul realm existence above the nascent soul realm could accomplish this. The whale sovereign and turtle origin strength was completely revealed. When their strength collided, it was actually comparable to a divine soul. As a heaven-shaking battle was about to erupt, a light voice echoed in the skies above the capital city. "Do you too want to tear down this solitude's capital city?" He was calm and natural. In this tense situation, he naturally exuded a strong self-confidence that seemed to be in control of everything. This was the will of the sea sovereign. Even someone as strong as the whale sovereign and turtle origin had to bow their heads in respect of this will. Both of them took a step back. Although their gazes were still unfriendly, they had already retracted their auras. "Greetings, your majesty." The sea sovereign's voice continued to echo out. "Concerning this matter, this solitude will personally investigate it. Whale sovereign, there is no need for you to interfere." The whale sovereign respectfully nodded without any hesitation at all. He brought some water, bowed once more to express his respect, and then turned to leave. Whether it was the sea sovereign or the whale sovereign himself, neither of them mentioned anything about wounding others. With their status, these were minor matters that weren't worth mentioning at all. "Mr. Turtle, I'll have to trouble you to clean up the loose ends." The sea sovereign's voice faded away. The invisible aura that covered the world also converged with it. To force back the whale sovereign with a single word, what he relied on wasn't something as simple as a few words. The sea races were more direct than humans. Strength determined everything. Soup Man was lifted onto the carriage. His injuries were serious, but looking at the old turtle's expression, he didn't seem worried at all. Thinking about it, as the person in charge of the royal palace's treasury, the amount of heavenly material stored within was astonishing. As long as he didn't die now, he likely wouldn't die. 7th Night Sky was taken away by the guards of Sea Spirit Pavilion. For some unknown reason, their attitude towards the royal palace guards was rather cold. The old turtle seemed to know something. He shook his head, not saying anything. However, he didn't discover that there was a pair of deep blue eyes staring at him from within Sea Spirit Pavilion's carriage. A bit dazed. Shui Zheng's injuries were terrifying. There was no need to say anything. Just by looking at the cracked flesh and broken bones that pierced through his skin, one could see it. But the coldness he displayed left everyone startled. He refused the help of his subordinates, and slowly stood up with difficulty. Then he mounted the sea-wolf. Moon-praying shrines, carriage turned and drove off into the distance. The old turtle glanced at them, seeming to appreciate Shuozhang. But he still frowned. He didn't know why Moon-praying Shrine wanted to meddle in today's matters. Whatever, if he couldn't figure it out, then he couldn't figure it out. He was getting old, and his brain wasn't that good to begin with. If he could save some of his brain, then he would. If he consumed too much, then it was easy to become stupid. The old turtle turned his head, and his eyes fell on Qinyu. The corners of his lips twitched. If he knew that bringing this brat here would bring so many variables to the capital city, he would have already flattened him and eaten him as a dessert. But now, not only could he not eat him, but he also had to carefully protect him. Thinking of this, the old turtle felt a bit depressed, and his complexion didn't look too good. He waved his hand. Capture him and bring him to the royal palace for interrogation. We must rescue Honorable Ning. Since Soup Man had already used this excuse, he might as well keep using it. Although it was a bit like burying one's head in the sand, for better or worse, he could at least fool them once or twice. As Qinyu was brought past, he cupped his hands together and bowed. Thank you, Senior, for helping me. The old turtle's complexion turned even uglier. Take him away! Take him away! Bah! If it weren't for His Majesty, who would want to save you? It had to be said that there were great masters within the royal palace. The follow-up measures were quickly carried out. When the sound shell station began to report that Honorable Ning had been kidnapped, the several streets around Sea Spirit Pavilion's 9-layer building were temporarily closed off for renovations. At the same time, over a dozen different versions of the news appeared in the capital city. Most of them said that Honorable Ning had fallen into a trap set up by humans and that they wanted to use his identity to plot against him. There were also 1 or 2 versions that claimed that Honorable Ning was a human. But these stories were crudely fabricated and filled with all sorts of unreasonable things. It was easy to see that they were all fake. With a series of methods used, not only did they suppress the shock caused by this incident in the shortest possible time, but they also successfully muddied the waters. The sea folk were filled with bewilderment, unable to determine that Honorable Ning was a human. That was enough. Qinyu, who had dazzled the world for a long period of time, had now been reduced to a pitiful prisoner. The shackles that the sea folk had specially forged to imprison powerful cultivators were now intimately attached to his body. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. The soul was sealed tightly, and the quality of the workmanship was impeccable. Luckily, it seemed that the people in the royal palace hadn't decided how to deal with him, or perhaps they had some sort of need for him. Thus, his storage ring and other personal belongings were still on his body. Qinyu thought for a moment. If it was the second situation, then it should be the terrifying vine beneath the royal palace. His heart relaxed a little. He had disguised himself as a sea spirit teacher and survived the competition, obtaining the sea spirit baptism, just as he was about to retire with a bountiful harvest. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, the current situation would occur? Even though he understood that thinking about this was useless, he still couldn't help but shake his head and bitterly smile. He sighed at his lack of luck. Seventh Night Sky was strong, but what he was most proud of wasn't his strength. Rather, it was his life-saving methods. As a mercenary that had roamed the sea region for many years, before he was accepted by Sea Spirit Pavilion, he had relied on his excellent life-saving techniques to survive. Thus, even though his injuries were heavy, after a careful inspection, the woman relaxed. She whispered a few words, and then left with the young miss. In her words, even if they moved out of that palace, they were still the most honored people in the world. They couldn't be tainted by the bad luck of the place where they were injured. Seventh Night Sky bitterly smiled. He knew the stubbornness and unwillingness in the depths of her heart, so he closed his eyes and pretended not to hear. He closed the door, his movements inadvertently becoming much lighter. It was clear that the woman wasn't as careless as she appeared. She turned around and saw that the young girl was a bit absent-minded. She thought for a moment and said in a soft voice, "Miss, were you scared by today's events?" The young girl revealed a smile. "Seventh Auntie, don't look down on me. I'm not that timid. It's just that—" She bit her lips and whispered, "Seventh Auntie, don't you think that Honorable Ning seems a bit familiar?" The woman frowned. She squatted down. "Miss, although Seventh Night Sky tried to stop the Whale Sovereign today, he is still a human. In the future, our Sea Spirit Pavilion will have to draw a clear line with him." The young girl seemed to understand, but also not understand. She nodded and didn't speak further. She lowered her head, her eyes rolling around. He was clearly a bit familiar. She had definitely seen him before. After the woman left, she rubbed her chin in her hands. She clenched her teeth and hesitated for a long time, as if she had made some sort of decision. Moon Praying Shrine settled down in the capital city. They didn't hide from the people that followed them in secret. They openly walked into the backyard of a casino in the capital city. In the sea region, which powerful tribe didn't have spies placed in the capital city? This was a matter that was tacitly agreed upon in private. For instance, this casino was one of Moon Praying Shrine's public properties. Xue Zheng went to recover from his wounds. Even if he was powerful enough, he would still need a long period of time to recover from such serious injuries. The white-dressed woman followed behind the vice priest. They left his room and walked down a long, winding corridor. After hesitating again and again, she said in a soft voice, "Vice priest, what should we do next?" The vice priest had a calm expression. "Wait." Moon Praying Shrine stood proudly on the outside. How could they not monitor the strongest forces in the sea region? Even that dignified royal palace had enough strength that they could use. For matters related to the Saint Flower, news absolutely could not be leaked out. Thus, no matter how anxious they were, they had to wait for news to arrive before making further plans. As the young girl made a decision and the group from Moon Praying Shrine waited in torment in the royal palace, a heated discussion about how to deal with Qinyu was in full swing. Chapter 176. Honorable Ning's surname wasn't Ning. His name was Qinyu, and he was a human. This was an absurd and ridiculous matter. Although it seemed like a storybook, it was indeed true. The high-ranking officials all had strange expressions on their faces. They couldn't help but sigh inwardly. When had humans become so fierce? After all, besides the time when Qinyu first entered the capital city and appeared as a sea spirit teacher, everything he did could be considered brilliant. In particular, the sea spirit baptism that had lasted for nearly 5 days. Thinking about it now caused their lips to twitch, and they silently cried out in their hearts, "O ruler that I sincerely believe in, are you myopic or something?" Of course, whether it was Qinyu or Ning Qin, myopic or not, there was one point that all the sea folk in the hall agreed on. He could not die. Although they knew that this was because of His Majesty, as they thought about how this human had deceived all the sea folk and ridiculed the capital city, not only could they not kill him, but they had to carefully protect him. They couldn't help but feel a bit depressed. Everyone, the Whale Sovereign has personally taken action, so it can be seen just how strong his killing intent is. The incident with the companion vine is still fresh in our minds, so we must be extra careful when protecting Qinyu. That's natural. With you and I protecting him with all our strength, if someone still manages to succeed, they might as well buy a piece of tofu and kill themselves. Protecting Qinyu shouldn't be difficult, but what about the aftermath? Although the rumors we spread have already taken effect, our Honorable Ning has played a trick in front of everyone's eyes. We need to give an explanation. That isn't difficult. Although there aren't many humans in the capital city, for better or worse, there are still some. We just need to pick someone of similar age and destroy their face. Then we can announce that they failed to escape and were killed. Isn't this a bit too rough? I think it's good. So what if it's rough? Do you think anyone would dare to investigate? We can also take this opportunity to tell those that, as long as they stand on His Majesty's side, Even if they are humans, we will still save them. This will help them understand just what choice they should make. The sea sovereign straightened his back. He sat quietly on his dragon throne, listening to his officials speak. His eyes flashed. "Mr. Turtle, what do you think about this matter?" Old Tortoise opened his eyes with a trace of confusion. The people beside him quickly reminded him in a low voice. His expression did not change as he said solemnly regarding this matter, "I do have some thoughts that I would like to discuss with your Majesty." The sea sovereign was startled. He wasn't sure if Chinyu was pretending to be calm and trying to find an excuse to cover up the fact that he had gone to sleep, or if he really had something to say. He waved his hand and said, "You may withdraw first." Mr. Turtle had an extremely high status. Although he was different from a loyal servant like Soup Man, he was still deeply trusted by His Majesty. No one was stupid enough to express any dissatisfaction. They all stood up and left. The sea sovereign's lips curved up in a smile. Mr. said that if we are tired or thirsty, it would be good for us to stop and rest. The old tortoise's skin was as thick as a mountain, but being teased by the most outstanding disciple still made him feel a little embarrassed. After all, similar things had happened several times before. However, he was confident today. He coughed lightly and quickly regained his composure. He said, "I have official business." The sea sovereign said, "Mr. Please speak." Old Tortoise said faintly, "Your Majesty, do you remember our discussion about the royal bloodline? Now might be a good opportunity." The sea sovereign frowned. "Mr. is speaking of this Chinyu?" The old tortoise smiled. "That's right. Ordinary sea folk only know that the sea spirit baptism is a rare opportunity that only purple card sea spirit teachers can have. But His Majesty and I both know that as long as one is strong enough, they can also obtain a gift from the sea spirit. How much of this gift is related to one's cultivation? But what is even more crucial is one's bloodline. Your Majesty should be well aware of this. If Chinyu can trigger a sea spirit baptism for 10 hours with his status as a human, then disregarding all other factors, I am sure that there is an extremely powerful bloodline flowing within him. In fact, his bloodline might even have evolved from the sea. A long, long time ago, there were legends of humans emerging from the sea and reproducing to this day. However, this was never recognized by the arrogant sea folk. After all, in their eyes, how could the incomparably noble sea folk possibly have the slightest relationship with the despicable humans? The sea sovereign remained silent. The matter of the royal bloodline that was mentioned before was the greatest secret of the royal family. Up until now, there were only a few people that knew of it, and the only ones that knew of it were him and Turtle Origin. The royal bloodline was regressing. Perhaps it was because their inheritance was too long, or perhaps it was because they had become the royal family and obtained a transcendent authority that was restricted by the heavens and earth, causing them to inevitably fall into decline. In these past years, the royal family's strength from their bloodline had become increasingly thin. There were even cases where they had completely devolved and lost their intelligence, unable to take human form. These special members of the royal family were gathered together and announced to the outside world that they had died. But in secret, professionals were sent out to try and find the reason. After a long time, nothing was found. Although on the surface the royal family was still strong and full of vitality, the trend of their bloodline devolution was becoming increasingly strong with the passage of time. Thus, the sea sovereign and Mr. Turtle had a secret discussion in order to find a way to resolve this issue. The method that the two of them thought of was straightforward, but the results were worth looking forward to. That was to marry outsiders. The outsiders here referred to races that weren't part of the sea races. This was because through the endless years of inheritance, the flood dragon race had maintained the tradition of marrying other powerful races. With the strength of the flood dragon bloodline, even after the bloodline was neutralized, it was still guaranteed that the majority of their descendants would still have the body of a flood dragon. Only after several generations of reproduction and the flood dragon bloodline became increasingly thin would the characteristics of other races begin to appear. Thus, the various powerful clans of the sea region all had the bloodline of a flood dragon in their bodies. For instance, the incomparably powerful whale sovereign. Strictly speaking, he should be the cousin of the sea sovereign. If he were to marry them, it would be impossible to further strengthen and activate his royal bloodline. Thus, humans became the best choice. But this matter was met with heavy resistance. In the past, when the sea sovereign had mentioned it, he had been spat out at by a group of stubborn old fools. They had even threatened that if His Majesty dared to tarnish the nobility of the royal family bloodline, they would smash their heads against the main gates of the royal palace and use their deaths to atone for their crimes to their ancestors. Although the sea sovereign wished that these old fellows would smash their heads against the wall and save his ears from further torment, he suppressed this thought and postponed this matter indefinitely. In all fairness, if they really wanted to marry a human, Chinyu was the best choice. But those stubborn council of elders were difficult to deal with. The old turtle seemed to have guessed this. He sneered, "Chinyu is related to your Majesty's safety. With that as a reason, who dares to oppose him? Your Majesty, if you wish to marry a human, then this is a wonderful opportunity. It can also solve Chinyu's problem. In addition, there is another piece of news that your Majesty might not know. This Chinyu is the cultivator that kidnapped Princess Lushy." The sea sovereign was startled. No wonder the whale sovereign was so angry that he couldn't help but personally take action. This solitude was originally thinking about it, but now it can be explained. The old turtle smiled. "I lost face in the past, but with the whale sovereign's strength, what happened in the past, it's hard to say. What I want to tell your Majesty is that Princess Lushy has recently sent people to secretly investigate information about Chinyu." The sea sovereign's eyes flashed. "It was Soup Man who discovered it. His injuries aren't light. Before he went into seclusion, he temporarily handed over his subordinates to me to manage on his behalf. It was there that I inadvertently discovered this information." "Mister, are you saying that Lushy is interested in this person?" "The reason that I repelled the demon monarch and rescued Chinyu was because I was entrusted by Princess Lushy if she didn't have any feelings for him. Why would she ask me to carefully investigate him? There are some things that I believe I have a good eye for. When it comes to Chinyu, I chose not to tell Princess Lushy because there was no possibility between them. But now that is a different matter. I can use this as an excuse to ask Lushy for her opinion." The sea sovereign thought for a moment and nodded. "Very well, then it shall be as Mr. says. But this matter must first be approved by Lushy. Otherwise, I will have to make further plans." The old turtle smiled and nodded. "Of course. Just how honored is the princess of my sea race's royal family? How could she possibly be forced to marry someone?" He stood up. "Your Majesty, I will make a trip now." Within the sea races, regardless of gender or age, everyone had the same right to inheritance. Everything depended on talent and methods, and the winner would obtain the qualifications to inherit. Thus, the princess residence was built outside the royal palace. It was grand and majestic, and the guards at the entrance had sharp eyes and fierce auras. They coldly swept their eyes over the sea folk that passed by, their bodies filled with an indifference that didn't allow strangers to approach. However, when Old Tortoise arrived, the guards all had flattering expressions on their faces. They smiled radiantly and bowed repeatedly in an extremely obsequious manner. "Ah, mister, if you are looking for Her Highness the Princess, then of course there is no problem. You can directly enter without needing to report. Her Highness the Princess has already given the order." Even as they watched Mr. Turtle's figure disappear, the smiles on their faces didn't fade in the least. Although there was no need to report, before Mr. Turtle could enter the rear residence, Princess Lushy had already led her personal maid out to greet him. "Mister, how come you have the free time to come visit me today? Her voice was calm and her face was also calm. But there were some subtle details that didn't escape the old turtle's eyes. This girl was clearly worried, and there was also a bit of hidden bitterness in her heart that she had been concealed from him. It was just that she was smart enough not to say anything. The old turtle's heart relaxed. He pretended to sigh. I just returned from the royal palace and listened to their argument until my head swelled. If your highness doesn't welcome me, then I will leave. Hold on. Mister, what are you arguing about? Mr. Turtle shook his head. They are arguing. What sort of status do I have? How could I do something so degrading? To be more specific, it is that Chinyu. He disguised himself as a sea spirit teacher to swindle and deceive everyone. You should also be aware of the changes in the sea mausoleum. Everyone says that it is a human plot, and there are many voices calling for him to be killed. Princess Lushy's face stiffened and a bit of anxiety appeared in her eyes. Old Turtle looked at her with interest. He blinked and said, I'm just joking. That brat Chinyu is fine for now, but what happens next will depend on Her Highness' choice. Princess Lushy bit her lips. Just as she was about to become angry, she regained her composure. What does that have to do with me? Mr. Turtle calmly said. It wasn't before, but now it is because His Majesty intends to marry the princess to Chinyu. If the princess agrees, then he will be the son-in-law of the sea races, and all old debts will be written off. If you don't agree, then it's hard to say what will happen. Princess Lushy was shocked and embarrassed. Her face flushed red and she pouted. Mister, what nonsense are you speaking? Mr. Turtle earnestly nodded. It looks like the princess isn't willing. I will go and report this to His Majesty. As he spoke, he turned to leave. Princess Lushy panicked. Stop! The old turtle turned around, a teasing look on his face. Chapter 177. As for the matter of Princess Lushy taking a liking to Chinyu, it was indeed a bit melodramatic. But as someone who came from the sea region's royal family, as a high and lofty princess, she had never experienced such a dangerous situation before. When Chinyu was filled with despair, the image of King Kwanglan was engraved in her heart. As time passed, it didn't fade. Rather, it became increasingly clear. One could attribute this matter to her being too young and inexperienced, lacking in experience. If several dozen years passed and the princess had seen the hearts of others, she feared she wouldn't have been moved so easily. You could think of it as Chinyu taking advantage of her ignorance to steal her heart. Of course, this act of stealing her heart had been unexpected. Thus, when Chinyu, who was under house arrest in the palace and waiting to be dealt with by the sea races, learned of this matter from the smiling and wretched turtle Origin, his face stiffened. In the eyes of the old turtle, this was the expression of someone who had been struck by a meat pie from the heavens and couldn't react in time. This was an obvious matter, one that couldn't be wrong even if they thought about it with their knees. In the blink of an eye, Chinyu had gone from a prisoner to the son-in-law of the sea races. As for whether or not Chinyu would refuse, heavens, is there something wrong with your head? This sort of good fortune can't be found anywhere, much less in the current situation. Not to mention that Princess Lushy was as beautiful as a flower and was known as the most beautiful pearl in the sea races. Even if her face was as round as a bucket and her voice as coarse as an old bull, you would still have to accept her in order to live. Humph! This old turtle has lived for so many years, and my understanding of human nature is not something that you juniors can compare with. With a clear cough, Turtle Origin had an indifferent and helpless expression. Originally, I and the other high-ranking officials were strongly opposed to this matter. After all, how could the royal bloodline of the sea region be diluted so casually? But His Majesty cherishes talent and believes that you are a rare and precious talent, so he overrode all opposition and came up with this method. Chinyu, you definitely saved the world in your past life. Yes, that's right. Then, do you have any more questions? Chi Nu's lips twitched as he looked at this old turtle who kept on saying that he had saved the world. Then he hurriedly said, "Brat, why don't you hurry up and nod?" Then he would be moved to tears. "Senior, can we discuss this? For instance, I can help you continue to treat that vine underground or something else. After all, I am only a human. So how could I be worthy of the noble Princess Lushy?" The old turtle's face stiffened. He turned around and stared at Chinyu, wondering if he was hearing things. But the little bastard's expression was a clear refusal. Rejected. He actually rejected a princess of the sea race. The first thought that came to old Tortoise's mind was that this brat was absolutely crazy. Immediately, a raging fire ignited in his chest, and at the same time he panicked a little. Because he never thought that Chinyu would refuse, he first asked for Princess Lushy's opinion. Then here came the problem. Now that the princess had agreed to marry him, was he supposed to turn around and say that she refused to marry him? That scene was too wonderful. He didn't dare to imagine it. Thus, the old turtle was enraged. He glared at Chinyu and shouted, "Chinyu, don't you know what's good for you? Have you considered the consequences of refusing the princess? Humph, let me warn you. Think before you make a decision. Otherwise, it will be too late when you regret it in the future." Chinyu's complexion was cloudy and uncertain. He clenched his teeth and said, "Fine, I agree." The old turtle was overjoyed. He thought that it was a good thing that he was dignified enough to subdue this human junior with just a few words. Just as he was secretly pleased with himself, he suddenly frowned, a suspicious look in his eyes. "You suddenly agreed. But why do I feel so uneasy? Speak, are you plotting something?" Chinyu had a helpless expression. "The one who asked me to agree was you. But now that I've agreed, you're suspicious. What should I do then?" The old turtle's thoughts raced. "There is something I must inform you in advance. After you are married, you and the princess cannot take a single step out of the mansion. Of course, this won't be for too long. Once the princess gives birth to a Kirin child, you will be free." Now, it was Chinyu's turn to stiffen. He cursed inwardly at how old people were and how cunning they were. He shook his head and said, "This junior believes that this is a great insult to me. So, regarding this marriage, we should discuss it at length." The old turtle cursed out loud. He rejoiced inwardly that he had been careful enough. Otherwise, if Chinyu had run away after the marriage, he really would have become a joke. Chinyu lowered his head, not speaking. No matter how the old turtle cursed, his heart gradually calmed down. It seemed that the sea races really did have a place where they needed him. As for his marriage with Princess Lushy, who the hell knew what was going on? In any case, it was impossible for him to agree. Otherwise, he really would have stayed behind to make a child. An hour. 2 hours. For hours. The old turtle gasped for breath. His lips were red from grinding and his voice was hoarse. He lifted a trembling hand and pointed at Chinyu. "You brat, you're good. Today, I will give you a firm word. If you don't agree to this marriage, you can forget about taking a single step out of here. Think about it carefully." He flicked his sleeves and left. Chinyu looked up, a bitter smile on his face. What he feared the most right now was this result. The sea races wouldn't let him go. In this royal palace, he really wouldn't be able to escape. He feared that he would have to do something to that underground vine before the sea races would agree to let him leave. As he furrowed his eyebrows in thought, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps. It was true that his cultivation had been sealed away, but his 5 senses were still extremely powerful. The footsteps were light. It should be a woman. Could it be that Princess Lushy had come to kill him just because he refused? The old turtle wouldn't do something like this. The sound of footsteps approached. He looked up and saw that it was indeed a woman. No, it should be called a little lowly, around 12 to 13 years old. She had a pair of beautiful eyes and a delicate face. Once she grew up, she would definitely be a beauty that could bring calamity to a nation. The young girl didn't speak. She approached Chinyu and sniffed him with her delicate nose. After several breaths of time, She looked at Qin Yu and brightly smiled. "It's you, I knew it was you." Qin Yu's face froze. What was going on here? Strange things happened every year, but this year seemed to be especially strange. First was the inexplicable marriage that he had no choice but to agree to. Then, in the blink of an eye, a beautiful little loli appeared, looking as if she had finally found him. But the key point was that he didn't have any impression of her at all. As he was stunned, the young girl threw herself at him. She intimately hugged Qin Yu's arm and jumped up and down. "I knew I would be able to see you again." Seventh Auntie always has a perfunctory expression on her face. But did you think I wouldn't be able to see through it? What do you mean the sea region is too vast, and it's hard for the two of us to meet again? And here I am meeting you again. When I go back, I will definitely mock Seventh Auntie for being too old-fashioned and inflexible. Well, Seventh Auntie doesn't like people calling her old, so forget it. Qin Yu's face was filled with a stunned expression. Soon he felt a bit embarrassed. The young girl happily twisted her body around, her newly developed chest rubbing against his arm. To be honest, it felt quite good. But the problem was that he wasn't that kind of person. He quickly drew back, putting some distance between him and the young girl. He said in a low voice, "This little girl, you've mistaken me for someone else. We shouldn't know each other." The young girl blinked her eyes. "I'm not mistaken, it's you. Let me tell you, my nose is very good. As long as I remember the smell, I will never forget it." As she spoke to hear, she seemed to suddenly think of something important. "Ah, I didn't say my name, that's just too rude. Big brother Qin Yu, you can call me Yeya. My name is Sang Yeya." Qin Yu reached out a hand to stop the young girl from throwing herself at him. He looked at her aggrieved expression and felt a bit guilty. He quickly said, "Yeya, you're called Yeya, I'll remember that. But can you tell me when we've met?" Sang Yeya earnestly said, "When I went out last time, I wasn't careful and was captured by some bad humans. They killed many sea folk and I almost died. Luckily, Big Brother Qin Yu rushed over and rescued me and Seventh Auntie." The young girl's words weren't clear, but Qin Yu soon found the corresponding part. He probingly asked, "Netherworld Sea Region?" Seeing Sang Ye nod again and again, Qin Yu confirmed that she was one of the sea folk that he had subconsciously rescued when they were fighting over the demonic path Saint Furnace. This was unexpected. It was no wonder that her attitude was so intimate. Qin Yu relaxed a little. The reason he had been so cautious and resistant before was because he was worried that this was a trap laid down by the sea folk. For instance, a honey trap. Good! Such a little loli was indeed capable of stirring up the dark side of a person's heart. Moreover, there was no one around, and the young girl was in such a cute and endearing state. Qin Yu coughed and steadied his thoughts. His eyes flashed. "Yeah, can you help me with something?" If this young girl was able to enter the royal palace to see him at this time, then her status was definitely not ordinary. He couldn't care too much about this right now. He could only give it a try. Sang Yeya had a serious expression. "Big brother Qin Yu, what do you want me to do?" "I will definitely help you." Qin Yu first expressed his thanks. "Yeya, help me investigate. Back then, when Soup Man, if you don't know him, ask someone else who saved me with him. Soup Man is my uncle's servant. I saw him when I was very young. Moreover, when Big Brother Qin Yu was captured, I was also there. The ones who saved you were my seventh uncle and also the leader of moon-praying Shrine's Wolf Riders. They seemed very fierce." "Yeah, who are you?" The young girl blabbered on. Although there were many unnecessary words, such as how old she was this year or when her birthday was, she still provided enough information. For instance, she came from Sega City and was the true master of Sea Spirit Pavilion, the only daughter of that mysterious madam. The master of this royal palace was her uncle. Good, her background was indeed great. If so, then Seventh Night Sky's actions could be explained. After all, he had once been someone from Sea Spirit Pavilion. But now that his status as a human had been exposed, it was likely that he could no longer borrow the strength of Sea Spirit Pavilion. Then, All that was left was Moon Praying Shrine. Although he didn't care much about the sea folk, he had been in the capital city for a long time, so he had heard some news from places like the Sound Shell Station. For instance, the various large tribes of the sea races were dissatisfied with the rule of the capital city. Moon Praying Shrine was strong. From the praise in the young girl's voice, he knew this. Then, they certainly wouldn't have saved him for no reason. There had to be a reason. Then, Chapter 178. A moment later, the young girl called Sengya walked out of the main hall with light steps. Then, all of the gentleness and adorableness disappeared from her beautiful face. Although she tried to remain calm and indifferent, there was still a calm and noble air about her that caused one to instinctively feel a deep sense of respect. The royal guards that stood guard outside the palace were all carefully selected. Whether it was loyalty or strength, they were all outstanding. But now they were staring straight ahead, their cold and indifferent faces without expression, as if they couldn't see the young girl walking out of the main hall. Like this, she draped a black robe over her shoulders and boarded a carriage that slowly departed. The journey was unimpeded. It was unknown who was driving the carriage, but the heavily guarded royal palace was completely open to this carriage. There were no questions or checks. The carriage left the royal palace. After walking through the streets of the capital city for a moment, there were no reminders of any hidden arrangements. The young girl's voice sounded out, "Go to the great Glory Gambling Hall." Perhaps because they knew that they had already been locked onto by the capital city spies. This gambling hall that belonged to Moon Praying Shrine had come up with such a vulgar name because of their deep background and good reputation. Even though many gamblers knew that this was a business of Moon Praying Shrine, they still came to support them. In any case, with so many people here, how could the Dark Knight Division investigate them one by one? That wouldn't tire out those rotten dogs that walked in the shadows. Of course, if one wanted to ask these gamblers if there were any spies or spies mixed in, was there a need to say anything? As long as they couldn't be caught, that was fine. The carriage left the royal palace and entered the rear courtyard of the Great Glory Gambling Hall. In a nearby alley, the people that had been sent out had already cleaned up the surroundings. The young girl thought for a moment and decided to personally hand over the letter. She ordered, "Go and draw someone out." The carriage nodded. His figure leapt onto the ground and vanished in several steps. The carriage stopped alone in the alley, but there was no need to worry about the young girl's safety. If there really was danger, they would be torn to pieces before they could approach. Soon, the carriage jumped over the high wall and returned. A wolf rider followed, closely behind. With a loud bang, countless cracks appeared in the ground as he coldly looked over. The window opened and the young girl reached out a hand. "There is a letter here. I'll have to trouble you to pass it to the vice priest." Although they didn't know who was in the carriage, that noble and aloof temperament was enough to show that this wasn't a game. The wolf rider hesitated and took the jade slip. The girl withdrew her hand. "Let's go." The coachman shook the reins and drove the carriage out of the alley. After leaving the Daihatsu casino, he said with slight dissatisfaction, "Miss, it was too dangerous just now." "Hee, it's fine, it's fine. He knows how powerful you are, so he wouldn't dare to do anything to me. Besides, it's just delivering a letter. The wolf cavalry aren't brainless. Anyway, it's best if there isn't a next time." Yes, I know, uncle." As the young girl obediently agreed, she secretly thought that this was her big brother Chinyu's letter. This was the first time she had asked someone to do something for her, so of course she had to personally hand it over to him to feel at ease. When she thought about the situation he was facing in the palace, the girl wrinkled her delicate little nose and muttered with a hint of complaint, "Really, what is uncle thinking? How can he grant a marriage? Also, big sister Qian is too unreserved." She actually agreed directly, and there was no need to talk about this side. Within the Great Glory Gambling Hall, the group from Moon Praying Shrine immediately went into closed-door discussions after receiving the letter. And in another part of the capital city, there were also people racking their brains for Chinyu. Of course, there was no good intentions behind this. The whale sovereign sat on a large throne, his back as straight as a pine tree. Even though he was silent, a powerful pressure covered the entire hall. Thus, all the sea folk in the hall were a bit more cautious with their words, but they still had to express their attitudes. I do not agree with attacking Chinyu. He is currently being closely protected by the royal palace. The chances of success are far too low, and the losses will surely be terrifying. Indeed, at this time, the price of killing Chinyu is far too great. Perhaps we can wait and slowly look for an opportunity. There are other hidden dangers in this matter. Perhaps it will anger the royal palace, and they will counterattack us. In short, the advisors that were analyzing the situation weren't optimistic about this matter. They all held an opposing attitude. The whale, sovereign, quietly listened. Although he appeared overbearing, he had always been a leader that listened to the opinions of others. This was why he had established such a large group of advisors to help him analyze what he was about to do, judge the pros and cons, and determine possible situations. Reality had proven that a single person was inferior to a group of people. These past years, this group of advisors had indeed helped him avoid many losses. But today, the whale sovereign wasn't prepared to accept their opinions, even if he knew they were correct. He lifted a hand, and the voices below quieted down. The whale sovereign lightly said, "I must kill Chinyu, but the disturbance won't be too great. I already have a plan. What you all need to do is help me plan how to deal with any possible attacks from the royal palace." The advisors respectfully nodded. They had already fulfilled their duties. Since their lord had chosen to act alone, they would unconditionally comply. Moreover, with this as a prerequisite, they would begin to plan, judge, and prepare. With a wave of his hand, the advisors left. The whale, sovereign, turned and looked at the figure in the corner. "Jing Guanjin, you have wasted far too much of my time and energy. But now I will give you a chance. Do a good job, and I will give you what you deserve." Jing Guanjin's complexion was pale, as if he hadn't seen the sun for a long time. He looked up and revealed a strange smile. "Is it to deal with Chinyu? Then I agree. Lord Father, no matter what price I have to pay. Towards the person who had ruined his life, how could he not hate him to the bone?" As for the whale sovereign saying that he would give him what he deserved, Jing Guanjin didn't believe him. Although he had been sent away as a child and there was almost no chance for them to get close, father and son always had a certain understanding of each other. His father was a person who placed great importance on morality. Thus, even though he had done many things in secret these past years, he was still highly regarded by the outside world. How could such a person allow a tainted descendant to inherit everything he had? Since everything was irreversible, then killing Chinyu was what he desired the most. Honorable Ning was a human. If there was a ranking list of the top 10 most shocking events of the year in the Sea region, this matter would undoubtedly be at the top. Moreover, several streets behind it, nearly every sea folk was scrambling to discuss this matter and express their own opinions. Of course, the secret news that the royal palace spread out was very useful. In addition to some careful guidance, there were always different voices appearing. For instance, Honorable Ning being kidnapped by humans, but in the end this could only deceive the middle and lower class sea folk. As for the true top circles of nobles, they naturally knew the truth long ago. Honorable Ning was a human. Or rather, Chinyu was a human. There was no doubt about this. Sea Spirit Pavilion had the greatest impact on this matter. Their soaring momentum had been swept away, and in a situation where there were people who wanted to slander them, it seemed as if their relationship with the human race had become unclear. Of course, those that did these things were people related to the sea spirit world. The true great figures knew of Sea Spirit Pavilion's background, so they scoffed at these rumors. Anyone could have colluded with the human race, but Sea Spirit Pavilion definitely did not. Besides them, the one that was affected the most was the Qing family on Noble Court Avenue. Ever since the day the 9-story building was destroyed, the Qing family, which had been bustling with visitors and was about to regain its former glory, suddenly fell into decline without any warning. Countless people who were close to the Qing family yesterday retreated far away in the blink of an eye. Their eyes were cold and indifferent, and there was even a trace of unconcealable schadenfreude. Emotions of envy, jealousy, and hate were inevitable for the intelligent races. They had envied the relationship between the Qing family and Qinyu, but now they were just as happy. Didn't they guard against us in the beginning, afraid that we would stick close to them? Hee, now it looks like we have to thank them. The indifference and resistance from the top circles of the sea races caused the Qing family to instantly fall into a difficult situation. In fact, it was even worse than before, and it seemed as if they would soon be pushed out. Several fierce internal conflicts had already erupted within the Qing family, and each time they ended on bad terms. There were even some Qing family masters that wanted to draw a clear line between them and Qinyu. The greatest connection between them was Lian and Qingqing's marriage. If so, then it was best to break this marriage apart. The sea races had flourished for a long time, enjoying all sorts of extravagant and luxurious pleasures. In high society, divorce and remarriage weren't rare at all. Moreover, Qingqing had just married not too long ago. If she withdrew now, as long as the Qing family could maintain their current status, they would be able to find a suitable marriage in the future. It was said that Madame Qing pondered for several days before calling her daughter home. No one knew what they discussed, but they knew that when Miss Qingqing left, there seemed to be a finger mark on her face. From then on, she hadn't taken a single step into the Qing family. But this was how things were. They couldn't avoid it for a lifetime. When a woman was 1 month old, she would return to her mother's home. This was a tradition of the sea races that had existed for thousands of years, in a large residence not too far away from Noble Court Avenue. Leon tidied himself up and rubbed his face. Then he pushed open the door and left. Qingqing was already waiting outside. As she saw him, she squeezed out a smile. "Leon, I've seriously thought about it. It's not like we have to return today, so how about we don't go?" Leon's heart warmed. He helped her tidy up her hair. "Don't worry about me. Sooner or later I will have to face it. As long as you are by my side, I have the confidence to face anything." Qingqing nodded. "I will always be by your side." Leon smiled. "Then I'll thank you in advance." He habitually waved his hand. Then he remembered that after Teacher's accident, that smart and outstanding steward had found an excuse to take sick leave. He couldn't help but helplessly shake his head. The fickleness of human nature. He had grown up at the bottom of society and had experienced far too much. But the speed at which the upper classes changed their attitudes still left him sighing. Qingqing grasped his hand. "If you want to go, then go. If you keep those half-hearted things, they will only be a disaster. If they look down on my husband, they will regret it in the future." Leon gripped her soft and warm hand. He earnestly said, "Qingqing, I swear I will do my best and not let you suffer any grievances. I'm fine right now. I don't feel wronged at all. The carriage is ready, so let's go." Chapter 179. Although the servants tried their best to appear normal, their eyes occasionally swept over, and they couldn't hide the panic in their eyes. Now that the matter had become so big, who knew when it would spread to this place? After all, Leon was Honorable Ning's only disciple. Perhaps now he couldn't be called Honorable Ning anymore. Leon had a calm expression. He helped his wife board the carriage and lightly said, "Let's go." The carriage drove towards Noble Court Avenue. After a brief silence, Qingqing hesitated and whispered, "Leon, what will happen to Mr. Ning?" Leon shook his head. "I don't know." He frowned and looked at her earnestly. "Qingqing, I know that you have some complaints in your heart, but I have to tell you that I knew Teacher's identity from the start. That's why I've been preparing for today's events since a long time ago. You have to know that without Teacher, it would have been impossible for us to be together. Lionheart would not have been able to transform, and Mother's illness cannot be cured. I am grateful to teacher. This was true in the past, is true now, and will be true in the future. Ching Ching, I hope that you can understand. After all, this wasn't teacher's original intention. Ching Ching blushed red. In these past 2 days when no one was around, she had indeed had similar thoughts. She never thought that, even though she hid them in her heart, they would still be discovered by Leon. Seeing his wife a bit embarrassed, Leon held her in his arms and comforted her. You having such thoughts is only an instinct. I don't blame you. Even if teacher knew, he would only appreciate that Ching Ching hasn't abandoned me even now. To be able to marry you is the greatest fortune of my life. Ching Ching looked at him and humphed. You only know how to say nice things. Her hands subconsciously tightened around his arm. At this time, the carriage violently shook as if it had collided with someone. Leon used all his strength to protect his wife as he loudly shouted out what was happening. The carriage driver couldn't answer. He was pulled to the side and was wildly beaten. The other party's attacks were heavy and blood flowed out. His pitiful cries weakened. The carriage door was flung open and several drunken faces appeared. Curses rushed out. Where did these people come from? They dare to bump into our people? They must be tired of living. Their imposing manner was insufferably arrogant, and they looked like the typical hedonistic young masters. However, looking at their clothes, it was not the style that was trending in the capital recently. Instead, they had some unique local characteristics, and they looked more like the children of nobles from other places. They swayed back and forth, their eyes filled with excitement. When their gazes fell onto Ching Ching, they began to burn with passion. Look, there's even a dainty young lady. Sure enough, King City is a place blessed with outstanding people. She's really beautiful. Beauty, you've bumped into our people. This is going to be troublesome. That's easy, as long as the young lady plays with us. Anything can be discussed. As they spoke, they stretched out their hands to grab Ching Ching. Leon was furious. What are you doing? Stop! He forcefully pushed them away, and in the blink of an eye, they began to fight. The few drunken debauches had ordinary cultivation bases, and their bodies had been hollowed out by alcohol and women. They swayed unsteadily, and they hadn't expected that this brat would actually dare to attack them. Some of them suffered a few blows to their faces, and they were instantly enraged. What are you waiting for? Capture him. Hit him as hard as you can. If he dies, it's on me. You bastard! Even my father hasn't hit me yet. You're dead. With loud shouts, the guards rushed over and knocked Leon to the ground. The debauches cursed him for not knowing the difference between life and death, and then surrounded the screaming Ching Ching once more. They had grown up in their own tribes and had been the second generation of villains who had committed all sorts of atrocities since they were young. To them, snatching a woman in the middle of the street wasn't anything at all. Even if this was the capital city, so what? Even the great figures of the capital city, out of consideration for the tribes behind them, could only smile at them. Jing Guanjin was in this group of people. His identity to the outside world was that of a bastard son of a powerful tribe. Thus he was able to arrange today's events. He was the one who had initiated this gathering, and he had intentionally made everyone drink too much. Then he would casually provoke them and flatter them a bit, causing them to become more aggressive and aggressive. What happened next was simple. After obtaining news that Leon and his wife had left, they would pay the bill ahead of time and meet here. Then it would be extremely simple to have a conflict. Ching Ching screamed, panic-stricken, helpless, and desperate. This caused Leon's eyes to turn blood red. Faintly, he heard someone say that this person was once Honorable Ning's disciple. Then, someone else said that even a teacher couldn't protect himself, so what could a disciple do? The following words were filled with filthy comments. Most of them were comments on Ching Ching's appearance and figure. Some people even said that this newly married woman was the most interesting to play with. If she struggled a bit more, that would be even better. Leon's head felt like it would explode. He didn't know where the strength came from. but he flipped over the guards holding on to him. There was a saber hilt in front of him, and he fiercely pulled it out. He clenched his teeth and rushed towards the several debauches. Jing Guanjin disdained to actually do something like snatching a woman in the middle of the street, even if he was doing it right now. This wasn't in conflict because he was only standing on the periphery with a strange smile on his face. He didn't rush forwards to tear off the woman's clothes. As he heard the sound of a saber being unsheathed behind him, as well as the rapid footsteps and gasps of breath, he sighed. He thought that, in order to kill Qinyu, his Lord Father had actually used such a despicable and shameless method. It was clear that his desire to kill Qinyu was extremely urgent. This was far too good. As he thought this, he remained motionless, allowing the saber to cut down on his back. As the saber edge cut through his flesh, Jing Guanjin frowned, thinking that it really was painful. Then his complexion turned panic-stricken. He screamed and, inadvertently, bumped into several people in front of him, making it so that they couldn't dodge the saber light that came slashing down on them. Thus, they cried out in pain and blood splashed everywhere. As the debauches were wetting themselves, Leon rushed in. Qingqing's dress was torn a bit, but she hadn't truly suffered a loss. She cried out and threw herself into his arms. At the same time, she desperately pulled him back so that he wouldn't continue attacking. This was because she had already recognized several of the debauches just now. They were the hostages of the various tribes that had been sent to the capital city. Perhaps they themselves were extremely weak, but since they had been sent to the capital city, they were all people with extremely noble statuses on the surface. If he injured them, the consequences would be severe. Kill him. Kill him for me. Jing Guanjin perfectly displayed the panic and hysteria of a debauchee disciple after being attacked. Among the bodyguards, a black-armored man looked up. His eyes were ice-cold and without any warmth. He lifted his hand and slapped out. No one imagined that such a true master was hidden among the bodyguards. A terrifying aura swept out like a tsunami, causing one's soul to tremble. Qingqing's eyes widened. She fiercely pushed Leon away. A brilliant light bloomed behind her, and motes of spiritual energy condensed into two beautiful wings. Then, the strength of this palm fell upon those wings. The formidable defensive strength of the sky-sea wings erupted, and the wings became incomparably radiant. But the strength of a nascent soul realm martial artist surpassed the limits of what they could withstand. With a light cracking sound, the two giant wings on Qingqing's body broke apart. She spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying backwards. She crashed into Leon, and the two of them tumbled on the ground. The sound of bones breaking caused one's scalp to tingle and blood to dye the ground red. The debauchee disciples were stunned. They didn't even have time to think about whose bodyguard was so strong. As they watched the situation grow out of control, they immediately sobered up. They glanced at each other and left, cursing their bad luck inwardly. Although they weren't afraid of trouble, this was too outrageous. They would be punished sooner or later, so it was best to leave as soon as possible. Jing Guanjin followed the crowd and boarded their own carriages. As he was leaving, he turned and glanced at the woman lying in a pool of blood. A complex light flashed in his eyes. Then he thought that Qinyu should be feeling very uncomfortable, right? The guilt on his face disappeared, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Leon struggled to hold onto Qingqing. He held onto her blood-stained hand and shouted out, "Save me! Save me!" But the person in his arms had already closed her eyes. She could no longer smile and hold onto his hand. On the streets of the capital city, a wave of sorrow flowed in, so thick that it was hard to breathe. Within the royal palace, in the main hall where he was placed under house arrest, Qinyu suddenly opened his eyes. Just now his mind had throbbed and he felt a tightness in his chest. What had happened? Qinyu frowned, but when he tried to sense it again, that throbbing feeling had already disappeared. But the tightness in his chest didn't subside as time passed. Rather, it became increasingly heavy. This bad premonition was confirmed as night fell. Besides Turtle Origin and Sangye, a third guest had arrived in the main hall that no one else had ever entered. To be more precise, it was a sea anemone that was being raised. This sort of sea life had a vague consciousness and a gorgeous appearance. Because it was rare and beautiful, its price was extremely high. It was a spirit pet that only wealthy families could raise. Now, it was holding a jade slip in its mouth. Qin, you had seen something similar before. It could store video files and was a relatively high-priced consumable. The person who did all of this seemed to have thought of Qin Yu's embarrassing situation with his cultivation sealed away, so they had thoughtfully prepared a monster storage bead. Once it was placed close to the jade slip, the monster strength inside would automatically flow out and pour into the jade slip to stimulate the video. Qin Yu watched as this beautiful sea anemone swam away. Then he picked up the jade slip and the monster storage bead. Like this, the scene that occurred on the streets of the capital city during the day was clearly displayed in front of him. Jing Guanjin, Qingqing lying in a pool of her own blood, Leon weeping blood without end. The video played to the end and then replayed again. After watching it over and over again, Qin Yu's eyebrows gradually furrowed together. Ka! The jade slip shattered. Qin Yu was silent. His body was half hidden in the shadows cast down by the curtains. His face was as cold as stone without any expression. His eyes were cold, but his heart was even colder. Leon and Qingqing had encountered an accident, and someone had recorded this video and sent it to him in the royal palace. It was clear that, from the very start, this matter had been aimed at him. They were only the choices that the other party had made when they couldn't touch him. Qin Yu took a deep breath, then took another deep breath. He whispered to himself, "Why did it have to be like this?" He admired Leon. His character, his diligence, his tenacity, all of these were outstanding. Thus, he wanted to help him to the best of his abilities. At the start, he felt a faint sense of satisfaction in his heart. This was because of his help that Leon had been able to escape his past fate and live a brand new life. Qin Yu was gratified. He told himself that he wasn't purely using Leon to hide his own identity. This was because what he had given him was more than enough to compensate for the risks Leon had taken. But now, it seemed that he owed him far too much. If he hadn't interfered, Leon might have remained humble and lowly, but the girl he loved wouldn't have died. Perhaps many years from now, he would still be able to recall her smile and not cry in despair as he hugged her ice-cold corpse. Why did it have to be like this? Qin Yu muttered to himself once more. His eyes became increasingly dim and cold. He was silent, waiting. Since they had acted and told him everything, things naturally wouldn't end like this. But were they really prepared to welcome everything? Chapter 180. The Day of Ancestral Worship was a grand and magnificent ceremony that the Sea Region's royal family had established in order to commemorate the first ancestor who had successfully transformed into a flood dragon. All direct descendants of the royal family had to attend in splendid attire. Today, killing was forbidden and peace was to be observed. Blood was not permitted within the scope of the capital city. Otherwise, it would be considered an offense against the ancestors and a great crime. The royal palace had been cleaned several days ago. Everyone was busy working to ensure that the upcoming ancestral worship ceremony would proceed smoothly. At the same time, the guards of the capital city were scattered throughout the capital city to ensure that the areas under their jurisdiction maintained peace. In truth, this was only a precaution. There weren't too many strict regulations amongst the sea races, and the Day of Ancestral Worship that was held every 10 years had already been deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts. Everyone knew just how important this ceremony was to the royal family. In particular, those stubborn old men of the Council of Elders. If anyone dared to touch upon the ancestral worship ceremony, they would absolutely flip out. It's clear that Leon and the Qin family's daughter were attacked. As long as one isn't blind, they would know who planned all of this. Turtle Origin sneered. It looks like someone is determined to kill Chinyu. The sea sovereign sat on his dragon throne. He lightly said, "Soon it will be the day of ancestral worship." The old turtle nodded, a gloomy expression on his face. "Your Majesty has also thought of this. This is precisely what I am worried about." The sea sovereign frowned. "Does Mr. believe that Chinyu will make a move?" The old turtle thought about how he had captured Chinyu because he had returned to check on his friends. He sighed. With his intelligence, it shouldn't be difficult for him to see that this is a trap. But how should I say this? Although this human Chinyu's actions are a bit shameful, he is still a person who values friendship. His attitude was clear when he said that he valued comradeship. As for whether or not Chinyu already knew that Leon and Chingching had been attacked, neither the sea sovereign nor turtle origin mentioned it. Since the whale sovereign had used such a shameless method, how could he not tell Chinyu? And he definitely had the strength to do so. Even if Chinyu was being held in the royal palace, they didn't doubt this. This was a despicable method, but it was also an open and above-board plot. Even if he knew it was a trap, it would be difficult to think of a way to resolve it. The whale sovereign was confident that Chinyu would make a move on the day of ancestral worship and achieve his goal. The old tortoise stood up. "I'll go warn him. Even if he wants revenge, he can't do it all at once." He hurried out, but in his heart he didn't have much confidence. A moment later, Chinyu was placed under house arrest in the palace. He appeared very calm. Turtle Origin probingly said a few words to him, and Chinyu's response was flawless. Occasionally he would even smile. This smile caused the old turtle's hair to stand on end. He couldn't be bothered to hide it any longer. He said in a low voice, "Chinyu, you can continue to consider your marriage with Princess Leshy. But what I want to tell you is that no matter what you learn, you cannot be impulsive. In 2 days, it will be the royal clan's ancestral worship day. All members of the royal clan will gather together. This is the most dignified and sacred ceremony of the royal clan. If anyone interrupts the ceremony, that will be the greatest offense to the royal clan's ancestors, a crime that cannot be forgiven." This was no longer a warning. Instead, he was cutting open everything and laying everything out in the open. Chinyu was silent for several breaths of time. He nodded. "Thank you for your good intentions, Senior. I understand." His expression was serious, and his attitude was sincere. It was obvious that he was grateful and seemed to be relieved. But as the old turtle walked out of the hall, he was still a bit unsure. He sighed and didn't say anything else. Instead, he secretly gathered up all of Sutman's strength. On the ancestral worship day, this place would become the most heavily guarded in the entire royal palace. Not even a sea fly could think of flying in. Time flowed on forever, unaffected by any strength. The ancestral worship day arrived as scheduled. The massive altar was grand and solemn. Countless rare and precious treasures were placed atop the purple jade platform as offerings to the ancestors. All the members of the royal clan's bloodline had gathered, and some had even rushed over from hundreds of thousands of miles away. This was because on this day, it wasn't just to honor the ancestors, but also to display their status as members of the royal clan. Starting from the altar, the order in which they arrived represented their status within the royal clan. If one was absent from this grand ancestral worship day, that often represented being expelled from the royal family. So it wasn't hard to understand why those sick and injured members of the royal clan who had to arrive on stretchers were doing everything they could. Princess Leshy was naturally among them, and her position was near the front. It wasn't that the sea sovereign favored this daughter of his, but rather that she had an outstanding bloodline and formidable cultivation talent. Amongst the juniors of the royal clan, she was extremely outstanding. Otherwise, just because she was born beautiful, would she really be called the most dazzling and beautiful pearl of the sea region? Don't be naive. At this time, as she felt the solemn atmosphere, she had a solemn expression. She silently prayed to her ancestors, hoping that they would bless her with happiness after marriage. That's right, even now, Princess Lushy didn't know that she had been rejected. She had secretly thought about marriage more than once. To unite with a human was an unprecedented matter for the royal clan. In the worst-case scenario, this might even affect her chances of inheriting the throne in the future. But the princess didn't regret it. She remembered that when she was a child, her mother had once told her that the most important thing in a woman's life was to find a husband that they liked and live a happy and comfortable life. Otherwise, even if she obtained more, she would only slowly wither away in emptiness and despair. Princess Lushy knew that her mother didn't like her father, and she had also witnessed her mother's current desolation. This sort of melancholy life wasn't what she wanted. If she was together with Chinyu, she should be very happy. Although he was a hateful person at times, and his words were particularly irritating, once they were married, this princess would use a few methods to eat him up. The women of the flood dragon race were not only born with a spirit-receiving body that could be transferred to their husband after marriage, but there were also many other wonderful things about them. As she thought about what she had secretly studied, the princess blushed red. She immediately thought that thinking about such things in this situation might be disrespectful to her ancestors. She restrained her thoughts and sincerely prayed, "Ancestors, please don't lower yourself to the same level as this little girl." The old turtle's surname was Turtle Origin, and his name was Primordial. The pure flood dragon bloodline flowed through his body. According to common sense, he should have been a mighty flood dragon by now, but the black turtle bloodline that he inherited had undergone a mutation and atavism, actually suppressing the flood dragon bloodline. It couldn't be helped that the heavens were playing with people. Now he was beneath the altar. He glanced at the distant whale, sovereign from the corner of his eyes, unable to figure out what he was thinking. By now, the sacrificial ceremony was more than halfway done. Once it ended, His Majesty would have everyone withdraw from the royal palace, and he wouldn't have a chance to do anything. Could he have made a mistake in his judgment? As Turtle Origin muttered to himself, one of the white-haired priests on the altar opened his eyes. He looked around, and when his eyes met with the gazes of the other disciples, they were filled with gratification, reluctance, and even more determination. Thus, in the next moment, a strong light surged on the altar. Turtle Origin looked up in amazement. He stared blankly at the flood dragon phantom that appeared in the light, and his eyes darkened. Sacrificial ceremony. Today's first variable had appeared. Princess Lushy had only heard about her ancestors. Although she found it hard to believe, she still couldn't help but feel awe in her heart. She just didn't know what had happened. Why did all the juniors have to leave and only the most powerful figures of the clan were left behind? But it shouldn't be some bad thing. Princess Lushy stopped. Because of the sudden situation with the sacrificial ceremony, there was plenty of time. She looked up at a corner of the royal palace and bit her lips, a bit hesitant. But once this thought emerged, it was especially difficult to suppress it. In short, the more she didn't want to think about it, the more complex it became. "I'll just take a look from afar." Princess Lushy comforted herself like this. Or perhaps she had found a way out of this embarrassing situation. She shyly smiled and walked over. Although she hadn't been here before, how could she not be concerned about the man she was about to marry? At the very least, she knew where he was placed. As she passed through several gardens and through a winding corridor, she suddenly saw a familiar figure running over from the corner of her eyes. This person's face was pale, and he was dripping with sweat. He hurriedly bowed as he saw the princess. "You are one of Supman's subordinates, right? Why are you in such a hurry?" Princess Lushy's eyes flashed. She thought that, at this time, this person should be one of Supman's subordinates. Just as she was thinking about how to secretly pry out some information from this person suddenly clutched his stomach and quickly bowed in apology. Then he turned and ran back in the direction he came from. This was a corner of the garden. It seemed to be a toilet or something like that. Princess Lushy blushed red. She thought that this person really didn't know the gravity of the situation. How could he possibly have a stomach ache when he was on duty? As she thought about how he had run away in a distressed manner while clutching his stomach, she smiled. But what the princess didn't know was that this sea folk with a stomach ache was the second variable of the day. After walking forwards for a while, she could see the main hall. Princess Lushy thought that she should stop here, but then she discovered that something wasn't right. In front of the main hall, there were several figures standing there. She didn't have a deep impression of most of them, but from their clothes, they should be the hostages of various large tribes. One of them was actually quite familiar, as if she had seen him not too long ago. She remembered. It was Jing Guanjin. She had seen him in a video before. On the surface, he seemed to be a bastard son of some tribe in the north. But she had heard that his true identity was the son of the whale sovereign. It seemed that he was quite valued. Some time ago, during the Great Sea Spirit Teacher Competition, he had even competed with Qinyu, but the result wasn't good. Thinking of this, a bit of pride gushed out from the princess's heart. But then she was a bit confused. What were they doing here? In these past days, the princess had been nervous and filled with anticipation, so she hadn't paid attention to what was happening in the capital city. A thought suddenly appeared. Could they be plotting against Qinyu? With Jing Guanjin's position, it was indeed possible for him to do so. Princess Lushy's heartbeat quickened. She saw a person walk out from the shadows of the grand hall. This person stretched his waist, lightly glanced at Jing Guanjin and the others, and then walked over. What did he want to do? Princess Lushy only had time to think this before she heard a loud shout in her ears. The criminal has escaped. Capture him. It was unknown where the guards came from, but they all rushed over. Princess Lushy's heart nearly stopped. She remembered what day it was today. Stop! Following the scream was a spray of blood. Beneath the warm light that sprinkled down from the spells of the capital city, there was a strange beauty to it. Chapter 181. Vaguely, that figure seemed to glance over here, and then retracted his gaze and continued forward. Guards tumbled backwards, screaming out in pain. Blood flowed everywhere. The situation had already reached an unsalvageable stage. Princess Lushy paled. She didn't know what had happened, but she knew that a storm was about to unfold, one that might even twist Qinyu to pieces. With a flick of his sleeves, several guards were sent flying away. Then, Qinyu's eyes locked onto Jing Guanjin. Perhaps because the icy cold aura stimulated the latter, Jing Guanjin frowned and turned to leave. But as he turned, he revealed a faint smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Qinyu to clearly see and feel a stabbing pain in his heart. This was good. In the end, you will die under my hands, even if it is only indirectly. Beside him, the black-armored man looked up and punched out. The matter had been completed. All he needed to do now was tie down this person, and there was no need to worry about what happened next. Across from him, Qinyu also attacked. Blood-red flames ignited on the surface of his body, and his speed rose to a point where it nearly surpassed the naked eye. And what was even more terrifying was that he didn't care about the fist that was aimed at his chest. In fact, it could even be said that he took the initiative to crash into it. This fist was heavy. His chest groaned and slightly caved in. Several bones seemed to have broken, and his complexion paled. But the harvest of withstanding this injury was that he reached out with his hand and gripped the black-armored man's neck. Then he ruthlessly tore it apart. Flesh and blood split apart, revealing a pale white throat. Blood gushed out like a fountain. The black-armored man's eyes widened as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he wasn't able to. This was because at the same time a black dagger had stabbed into his abdomen. With a light twist, it severed all of his life force. Qinyu grabbed the corpse and continued forwards. The young masters cried out in alarm. Jing Guanjin turned around, a look of amazement in his eyes. He never thought that his father's guard would lose his life in a single strike. He was extremely strong, looking at Qin Yu rushing towards him. Jing, Guanjin sneered. Did Qin Yu think he could kill him like this? How childish! Shua, shua! Two figures leapt out from the royal guards that had been slaughtered. Their strong bodies erupted with a dreadful aura, blocking Qin Yu like a mountain range. After several exchanges, terrifying collisions rang out and Qin Yu was shaken back. He roared out in unwillingness and ruthlessly threw the corpse in his hands. Bang! The corpse smashed into the ground, creating a large hole. Flesh and bones were separated and blood flowed freely. Jing, Guanjin laughed. This was simply too perfect. On the day of ancestral worship, the more blood the better, right? He collided several more times. Facing two sea folk masters, he seemed to have suffered a bit of a loss even though he was already injured. After another collision, he was forced to retreat. In the short span of a dozen breaths, the ground outside the hall was a mess. The corpses of the palace guards and the black-armored man on the ground were extremely eye-catching. Princess Lushy's mind buzzed, and she found it hard to think. She could only subconsciously widen her eyes as she looked at that distant figure. Ever since the day of ancestral worship was held, at least in her memory, such a terrible thing had never happened. What should she do? Murder. Save me. Jing Guanjin cried out miserably, but his eyes were still fixed on Qin Yu, filled with joy and relief. Whoosh, whoosh. With the sound of breaking air, the first to appear were the whale sovereign and turtle origin. The former had an indifferent expression, and the latter had a grim expression. Then he followed them. Behind him was a group of old men with white hair and trembling bodies. But no one knew how they could run so fast. Looking at the massacre before them and smelling the thick stench of blood, their faces turned ghastly pale, and their fingers trembled. How dare you? Where did this human come from? How dare he ruin the day of ancestral worship? Capture him. Dismember him. If hatred could kill, then Qin Yu would have already been chopped to pieces by these old fellows' gazes. The whale, sovereign, faintly said, Junior Qin Yu, no one can protect you today. He took a step forward, and an earth-shattering aura covered the sky and earth. Turtle Origin moved and blocked in front of him. The whale, sovereign, frowned. You still want to stop me today? Turtle Origin, even if you are a black turtle, don't forget that the blood of the Flood Dragon clan also flows in your body. Turtle Origin, you're still not backing down. Protecting this human is a great disrespect to our ancestors. Get out of the way. Even if His Majesty comes today, he will still die. Even someone as powerful as the old turtle felt his scalp tingle. If this group of old farts really went crazy, even he would find it hard to deal with them. If they were unreasonable, they could stir up waves, much less now that Qin Yu had given them such a good excuse. As he was struggling, he glanced over at Qin Yu's calm face. The old turtle was immediately enraged. You guessed that we needed something from you, right? Otherwise, how could you be so fearless? His complexion darkened. He said in a low voice, Qin Yu, what explanation do you have for this? Of course. He was still trying to delay for time. His Majesty naturally knew that only he could suppress what had happened here. The old fellows of the Council of Elders had icy expressions. What else was there to say? You are a human prisoner, and yet you publicly killed people on the day of ancestral worship. Shouldn't you be punished with death? But looking at this human boy's appearance, it seemed that he really was prepared to say something. The old fellows gathered their strength. No matter how glib this boy's tongue was, he would nail him to death. Qin Yu opened his mouth, but, contrary to the expectations of the old fellows, he didn't try to explain or argue. He only looked at the old man and said, You don't need to shout for help. No one can save you. These words were inexplicable. It was as if the whale sovereign's words had been changed back to something else. As the old fellows thought of this, they were enraged. What an arrogant human. They really should drag him out and kill him for 2 hours. Of course, a person only had one life, It was impossible to kill him for 2 hours. But unlike their anger, several people felt their hearts shrink as a foreboding premonition rose up in their hearts. Jing Guanjin felt as if he had fallen into an icy lake. Qin Yu's light eyes and light tone had actually become endless fear that shrouded his heart. He wanted to sneer. His father had already appeared and had 1,000 methods at his disposal, so how could he possibly injure him? But he discovered that he couldn't laugh. His body was numb like a piece of wood. Although his consciousness was rejoicing, he couldn't control it at all. Why was this happening? Fear erupted from the depths of his heart. Jing Guanjin wanted to ask for help, but his field of vision began to fall into darkness. There was a series of thumping sounds that entered his ears before his consciousness faded away. Then he fell down. Together with a group of young masters, he stiffly fell to the ground, his body turning a horrifying dark blue color. The whale sovereign's face stiffened, his figure flickered, and he appeared beside Jing Guanjin. He placed a hand on Jing Guanjin's body, and after several breaths of time he looked up. His voice was light, but it seemed to come from the 9 nether hells. What a fierce poison! He had decided to abandon Jing Guanjin. His reason for abandoning Jing Guanjin was a bit different from what he had thought, but there was no longer any meaning in saying these things. But no matter what, the whale sovereign never thought that Jing Guanjin would die, especially not in front of him. Turtle Origin was examining the other young masters, but the poison had already entered their bodies. Even their souls had scattered beneath this poison. He looked up and his eyes fell on Qin Yu. There was a bit of astonishment in his eyes, but there was even more gloominess. He originally thought that he had pushed matters beyond redemption, but who would have thought that the pleasant surprise was still to come? Princess Leshy's field of vision darkened, and she nearly fainted. If there was a chance of resolving the situation by killing some guards, then the deaths of Jing Guanjin and the hostages of the tribes had pushed matters to an irreversible state. At the same time, he had cut off his only chance of survival. It was unknown where the impulse came from, but Princess Leshy rushed over and shouted at him. Why? Why? Qin Yu's eyes were calm. They deserved to die. Yes, they did deserve to die. But what a pity. Taoist Wuyuan's poison had been a bit too tyrannical. These people had died far too quickly. Perhaps they hadn't felt any pain at all. That was a bit of a pity. Qin Yu didn't hide his disappointment. Thus, the whale sovereign narrowed his eyes, and a terrifying aura surged around him like a tide. As for the Council of Elders, because the scene in front of them was far too intense, several of them had their eyes roll back into their heads and their legs buckled as they fainted. As for the rest, they cursed out loud. It seemed that if it weren't for the fact that they feared the poison that could appear at any moment, they would have rushed forwards and personally killed them. The whale sovereign had taken the initiative. Turtle Origin hesitated for a moment, but in the end he didn't do anything. With the situation having reached this point, he no longer had the right to intervene. He looked towards the center of the royal palace, the place where the highest authority in the world was gathered. His heart was filled with anxiety. Your Majesty, you still haven't made a decision. If you delay any longer, it really will be too late. Qin Yu's complexion paled. Part of it was because of his injuries, but more of it was because he was forced back by this aura. He was well aware that if this whale sovereign truly wanted to kill him, then even if he used the boundless blue finger, he would still die. But he had already expected this scene to occur. Since he chose to attack, he had already prepared himself, even if the result was death. This was because there were some things that even though one knew were wrong and harmful, one still had to do them. After all, what he owed was his life. Only his life could make up for it, whether it was someone else's or one's own. Qin Yu closed his eyes. He gathered his will and spirit. If he couldn't wait for the final turning point, then before he died, he would release his final and most blazing brilliance. Die without resistance. Sorry, but that wasn't his style. The whale sovereign's footsteps weren't fast, as if he were waiting for something. But as he approached, a terrifying pressure descended upon him like mountains, becoming increasingly horrifying. Qin Yu's black robes were pressed against his body. Perhaps it had aroused his injuries, but blood began to gush out from every orifice of his head. But his back remained straight, and his eyes were cold and sharp. There was no pain or regret, only determination. Had his final weight failed? Then he would die. Qin Yu lifted his hand. Beneath the terrifying pressure, every movement he made was slow and difficult. He could even hear his own bones creaking. At the same time, the black robes that had been completely suppressed finally regained their freedom. They tumbled in the air. Above the royal palace, winds rose and clouds gathered. Chapter 182. Stay your hand. As the winds and clouds gathered and slaughter descended, deep within the royal palace, the man who wielded the highest authority in the world finally spoke out. He was calm and indifferent, without any fluctuations of strength. But there seemed to be an invisible magic that left everyone's hearts cold and filled with endless awe. A trace of disappointment flashed in the whale sovereign's eyes. But there were even more waves of calm, as if he had already expected this obstruction in front of him. He took a light breath and stopped. He lowered his head to express his respect. At this moment, the whale sovereign's face was cold and indifferent, but his faintly furrowed eyebrows and a trace of anger in his eyes perfectly displayed his unwillingness and helplessness. The people of the Sea Race Video Association really should send a trophy to the whale sovereign. This was because his performance was far too perfect, so perfect that the Council of Elders felt a stabbing pain in their hearts. Look, even in this situation, the great Sea Race sovereign still wanted to protect a human without any scruples about the attitude of his subordinates. Others might fear unsurpassed royal authority, but they weren't. Their necks were already buried in the yellow soil. So how could they be afraid of death? His Majesty had been blinded. What they needed to do was wake him up and scold him awake. Your Majesty, we acknowledge that you are the strongest and wisest ruler in the history of the royal family. But now you have changed. You have become unreasonable and self-opinionated. Although the Council of Elders has no real authority, we are the elders of the royal family. We have the responsibility and obligation to help your Majesty and look after this country. Your mistakes are your mistakes, but do you plan on repeating them? Wake up. Has the unsurpassed royal authority already caused you to lose your judgment? Or does your Majesty want to become the most incapable ruler in the history of the sea races? The whale sovereign was silent. What he needed now was to play the role of a loyal ruler. The rest would be handled by the elders. But in the next moment, his eyes narrowed, revealing a look of surprise and praise. Indeed, his Majesty was still his Majesty. He had never changed. Fellow elders, has this solitude not spoken for too long, or has my hands not been stained with blood for too long that my royal authority has fallen to a point where it can be questioned? The sea sovereign's voice was still light, but everyone could feel the terrifying aura that recklessly flowed out from his words. The Council of Elders find it was a bit disrespectful to always refer to the elders as undying old farts. Then they would just refer to them as old thieves. After all, an old man who didn't die was a thief. Their faces were stiff, and their bodies were trembling with anger. It seemed that they had not expected His Majesty to respond to them like this. Raging flames burned wantonly in their chests. However, their lips trembled, their bodies trembled, and no one dared to speak again. This made the old thieves realize with shame that they were still afraid of death, because His Majesty would really kill. Back then, in order to successfully ascend that throne, he had already killed many people, including members of the royal family. In other words, His Majesty had killed the most members of the royal family. At that time, there were many vacant positions in the Elder Council. It was only in the past 200 to 300 years that the positions were gradually filled. In that case, who could be sure that His Majesty would not wipe out the Elders' Council again? The whale, sovereign, praised His Majesty's strength and strength. But he couldn't remain silent any longer. He looked up, his expression solemn. Your Majesty, today is the day of ancestral worship. For such a vile matter to occur, you must give us an explanation, even if you are the supreme ruler of the sea races, because this explanation is not for us, but for the ancestors of the royal family who are protecting them in the dark. These words were heavy and well grasped. Even though he had completely removed himself from the situation, he still placed the greatest pressure on the sea sovereign. This solitude will give an explanation. Now all of you draw back. The sea sovereign lightly said, as if he didn't feel this pressure at all. The whale, sovereign, bowed. He drew back several steps, picked up Jing Guanjin's corpse and strode away. The old thieves of the Council of Elders all had gloomy complexions. Before they left, their cold and gloomy eyes indicated that this matter wouldn't end like this. If His Majesty wanted to give an explanation, then they would wait. Princess Lushy bit her lips. She didn't know how she was doing, but as she left the royal palace and was welcomed into a carriage that drove towards the princess mansion, she weakly leaned back against the soft couch. A sudden intuition rose in her heart. The future life she imagined might never be realized. Qin Yu's injuries weren't light, but with the powerful demon body and the existence of water attribute and wood attribute spiritual objects in his body, he was even tougher than a cockroach. As long as it wasn't an injury that would instantly kill him, he could recover in the shortest period of time. Thus, at this time, Qin Yu was quietly sitting in the palace. Besides his pale complexion, he didn't seem injured at all. The old turtle sneered again and again. What an awe-inspiring and fierce human cultivator. On the royal ancestral worship day, you went on a killing spree and killed nearly all of your enemies. But so what? Everyone knows that what happened to your disciple was the work of the whale sovereign. So why haven't you killed him yet? Qin Yu thought for a moment. As long as I am alive, there will always be a chance. The old turtle nearly went mad with rage. Was this the main point? You bastard! I am laughing at your recklessness. Stop pretending to be a fool in front of me. He clenched his teeth and resisted the urge to smash this brat to pieces. He lowered his voice and roared, Now you have one final path. Agree to the marriage with Princess Lushy and voluntarily marry into the Flood Dragon clan. His Majesty will announce that before you attacked, you already had the status of a member of the royal family. That will save your life. Qin Yu didn't hesitate. He shook his head. This junior cannot agree to the marriage. But perhaps I have a way to make that underground vine even more formidable so that it can withstand even more wild strength. The old turtle's eyes instantly turned sharp and sharp, like invisible arrows piercing into his heart. A terrifying aura circulated around him, and Qin Yu paled even further. He bitterly smiled, and blood flowed out from the corners of his lips. Senior, although I have done my best to show that there is nothing wrong with me, I am still injured. You had best be a bit more gentle. These words were a bit ambiguous. The old turtle's face stiffened. His eyes were filled with dread and coldness. He couldn't maintain it any longer. He coughed and said, You brat, you have a lot of thoughts, but let me tell you, sometimes those who think themselves clever will really die. How you choose, think about it yourself. 2 days, I will give you 2 days. Walking out of the main hall, the smell of blood still lingered in the air. Since Jing Guanjin and the others had appeared here, the guards were doomed to die. Even if they had been wronged with His Majesty enraged, it was impossible for them to escape. Sacrifices, royal palace. Thinking about it, perhaps His Majesty himself didn't expect that the whale sovereign would be able to do things to this degree. After the guards were cleaned out, it would be difficult to get through again. But as the night deepened, Sangya still arrived with a tired expression. Her eyes were filled with worry. Big brother Qin Yu, I don't know who it was, but what you did today was publicized. Now everyone knows. She pursed her lips as if she were about to cry. Chin Yu didn't think he would see her again. As he saw that the young girl was truly worried about him, his heart warmed and he smiled. Don't worry. Since I wasn't killed here today, my chances of living are much higher. Of course, even if I can't avoid death in the end, it can still be considered a bit more time, right? The young girl pouted. She coquettishly said, "What time is it?" And yet Big Brother Chin Yu is still in the mood to joke around. "If you die, I will be sad." She blinked her eyes and then suddenly said, "Big Brother Chin Yu, if you don't want to marry Big Sister Lushy, then you can marry me. As long as there is a reason, I will definitely protect you." Really, marrying me is the same as marrying Big Sister Lushy. You can also obtain the status of a royal family member. The young girl was excited, as if she had thought of some wonderful idea. Chin Yu couldn't help but laugh. Well, although our classmate Sangya was indeed tall and sweet and cute, she was still a very, very fresh and tender little loli. How could he possibly do such a thing? Cough, cough, he was overthinking things. It was simply impossible. Otherwise, he would have chosen Princess Lushy. In any case, they were both beauties. It seemed he was overthinking things. Chin Yu quickly dispelled these thoughts. He tried to appear as calm as possible so that he wouldn't hurt this young girl's delicate heart. "Yaya is certainly good, but you are too young. It is impossible for us to be together." He smiled as he spoke, but he never imagined that in the next moment he would receive a critical blow of 120,000 points. Sangya looked down at her chest that had just swelled up and was suddenly enlightened. "So that's how it is. That's easy to solve. Big Brother Chin Yu. Look!" There was a flash of light, and the sweet and tender little loli vanished. What appeared in front of him was a beautiful woman with a slender waist and long legs. And what was even more terrifying was that even though her body had suddenly grown larger, her clothes didn't have this ability. Thus, they miserably burst apart. Her legs were exposed, her waist was exposed, her chest, she didn't seem too comfortable being wrapped around. She reached out a hand, wanting to pull away the tightened cloth. Chin Yu was dumbfounded, but he suddenly regained his composure. He shouted, "Don't move!" Big Brother Chin Yu, what is it?" It was still Sangya's voice, but in her current state, when combined with this soft and tender lowly voice, the lethality was far too terrifying. Chin Yu fiercely turned around, looking up. He feared that if he continued to look, he would have a nosebleed. That would be far too shameful. "Big Brother Chin Yu? Cough, cough. Yeah. Change back first and put on your clothes. Then we can talk, okay?" Oh, she was still so obedient. There was another burst of light, and the young girl smiled. "All right." Chin Yu turned around and coughed, trying to appear calm. But the young girl's eyes seemed to be searching for something on his body, causing his expression to stiffen. "Yeah, don't do this again in the future." Sangya smiled in a cute manner. "I know. That's why I only change my body in front of people I'm close to. Big Brother Chin Yu, do you think I look good? That really is the grown-up Yaya. It's just that my mother didn't want my strength to grow too quickly, so she placed a seal on me." She waved her hand as if she were dispersing her worries. The little lowly Sangya blinked her large eyes. "Now, Big Brother Chin Yu, you don't need to worry about me anymore. Yaya can grow up, so of course I can marry you. How about it? Do you want to consider it? Yaya is very serious about this." Chin Yu Yen. Chapter 183. He spent a great deal of effort to make Sangya understand that it was impossible for the two of them to be together. In order to completely dispel her thoughts, Chin Yu had no choice but to fabricate the fact that he was already married. As soon as he brought out this great killing weapon, Sangya immediately calmed down. But the aggrieved look in her eyes clearly said, "Who is that woman? How could she act so quickly? How hateful!" Chin Yu wryly smiled. He couldn't help but sigh that this little girl's charm was far too high. After some comforting words, Sangya revealed her worry about the current situation. Sangya immediately put down her emotions and nervously said, Big Brother Chinyu, how about you agree? Otherwise, according to the current situation, they won't let you go. Chinyu smiled. I'm already married, so how could I lie to others? So, I cannot agree to this marriage. I don't have any problems with it right now. Yeah. Did you give the letter to Moon Praying Shrine? I sent it the same day. I had people keep an eye on them. But the Great Glory Gambling Hall has been very quiet these past few days. I haven't seen anything unusual. Of course, the young girl couldn't help but explain the origins of the Great Glory Gambling Hall. She also expressed that she didn't like the name. As Chinyu listened to her rambling, his heart calmed down a little. When his identity was exposed and the whale sovereign tried to kill him, there had to be a reason why Moon Praying Shrine dared to interfere. Thinking about it, it should be related to his disguise as a sea spirit teacher and his fame. Thus, in the letter that Chinyu had Sangye deliver, there was a simple sentence. As long as it was a sea spirit, as long as it wasn't dead, he could save it. Moon Praying Shrine would definitely respond. If there was no movement now, then something was wrong. Concerning Moon Praying Shrine strength, Chinyu had inquired about it from Sangye. The bloodline of the old dynasty's queen had a powerful war division. In the past, they had even raised their flag and rebelled against the capital city, causing fierce battles to erupt. The final result was that Moon Praying Shrine was subdued by the capital city, and they acknowledged their supreme authority. But this was only a superficial impression that ordinary sea folk saw. In Sangye's words, Moon Praying Shrine could be said to be the only tribe in the sea region that maintained absolute independence and had the qualifications to contend with the capital city. Chinyu had promised the royal palace that he would help the underground vine grow. Although he still didn't know what use it had, there was no doubt that it was extremely important. In this sort of premise, if Moon Praying Shrine attacked, there should be a chance he could escape. He let out a light breath and gathered his thoughts. He looked up. Yeah, can I trouble you with something else? Sangye nodded. Big Brother Chinyu, please speak. Thank you, yeah. You should know about my disciple's situation. Regardless of what the final outcome is, I don't think I can help him anymore. So, I hope that Yaya can look after Leon for me. As Chinyu spoke to hear, he paused for a moment. Consider it my compensation. Sangye's eyes brightened. Big Brother Chinyu, you've already done enough. After 7th Ani and 7th Uncle learned of this, although they were shocked, they still admired Big Brother Chinyu a great deal. In 7th Ani's words, Big Brother Chinyu is a loyal and righteous person, but what a pity it's not the sea races, right? Chinyu smiled, a bit of loneliness in his eyes. In truth, no matter who I kill or what I do, I still owe Leon. This is because once a person dies, it is impossible for them to come back to life. This matter has taught me a profound lesson. Don't casually implicate others, because even if you think you've given them a lot, in the end, all you've done is hurt them. The young girl was confused as she heard this, but she could still make out the general meaning. Her eyes brightened as she looked at Chinyu, but she pouted and whispered, Why should I? If I met Big Brother Chinyu a bit later, I wouldn't have a chance. This isn't fair. Humph humph. What a lucky woman. I hope that she will always be good to Big Brother Chinyu. Otherwise, I will definitely steal her away. Ah, I'm not happy, I'm jealous. Sangye earnestly looked up. Big Brother Chinyu, can't you divorce her and marry me? Is she even more beautiful than me? Chinyu shook his head and smiled. Don't speak such nonsense. He paused for a moment, a bit more nostalgia in his voice. Yaya is very, very beautiful, but in my eyes she is irreplaceable. Moreover, she left several years ago. Even if I wanted to divorce her, I wouldn't have the chance. His words were heavy and filled with emotion. The young girl instantly understood what he meant when he said left. She revealed a bit of guilt and whispered, Big Brother Chinyu, I didn't mean to mention your sad past. She sighed in her heart. That woman had already passed away, but her shadow remained in Big Brother Chinyu's heart. How could she compare? Perhaps no matter what she did, There was no way she could replace her. But the more it was like this, the more she felt that Big Brother Chinyu was much better. What should she do? What should she do? Chin, you didn't know what the young girl was thinking. Ning Ling's figure appeared in his mind. After several breaths of time, he shook his head and revealed a helpless smile. Perhaps it was because the sudden events had affected him, but he had also become sentimental. He said a few more words and urged the young girl to leave. Even if he didn't know what had happened outside, he could imagine that this young girl must have spent a great deal of effort to enter this place. The longer he stayed, the more likely problems would occur. He didn't want to owe anyone anymore. As if sensing Chinyu's thoughts, the young girl nodded obediently. She said that she would think of a way, but her expression was still a bit reluctant. After leaving the hall, the carriage was waiting in the shadows. After she boarded, the driver shook the reins and the carriage quietly left. After some distance, the driver couldn't help but say, "Miss, what you did just now was really too dangerous." He really couldn't find any words to describe it. Could it be that, even though her chest wasn't big enough, she had already lost her mind? Just now he had nearly rushed in. Uncle, what did you say?" "I said, miss, you shouldn't have." "Uncle, Big Brother Chinyu is a very, very good person. I used to hate humans, but from today onwards, I have decided to change my opinion of them. There are also good people amongst humans. For instance, Big Brother Chinyu." I really envy that woman who met Big Brother Chinyu first. Although she is already dead, she was able to protect Big Brother Chinyu's heart. Hearing this, the driver believed that there was no need to repeat himself. Of course, the young girl was holding her chest, a look of longing on her face. It was clear that she had already forgotten to speak with him. In the palace, the Sea Sovereign looked away. He thought for a moment and said, "Mister, do you really think that Chinyu won't agree to this marriage?" The old turtle's complexion was ugly. "Your Majesty, although I don't want to admit it, that human bastard Chinyu does have his own principles. Even if he says he won't agree, I fear that he will still refuse 2 days from now." The Sea Sovereign smiled. This sort of person that doesn't fear death is rare. Moreover, this solitude is really curious. Why would he refuse? Could it really be because of a woman? He didn't believe this, but this seemed to be the truth. The old turtle sneered. "I think he knows that we have to use him. Otherwise he wouldn't be so unscrupulous." The Sea Sovereign nodded. "Mister's words are reasonable, but you and I have both seen the situation today. If this solitude doesn't do anything, then he really is prepared to go all out." The old turtle curled his lips. The Sea Sovereign shook his head. "It seems that Mister has truly been angered by him these past days. This Chinyu has some skill. At least, this solitude has never done something like this in the past. Your Majesty, we're already at this point, so there is no need to be so mysterious. Just what are you thinking? The day of ancestral worship is such an important matter. Although the Whale Sovereign is an incomparably loathsome person, his words aren't wrong. It's impossible that he didn't give an explanation. If Chinyu refuses the marriage and doesn't have a royal title, how does your Majesty plan on saving him?" The Sea Sovereign glanced at him. Could that girl Yea's actions be hidden from Mister's discerning eyes? Since this solitude has allowed her to do as she pleases, that is why I buried a hidden card. I originally didn't want to use it, but now it seems that I have no other choice. The old turtle coughed. "But if I do this, it won't look good on my face." Mister taught me before. Compared to living, face is meaningless." The Sea Sovereign had a light expression. "Moreover, this is a concession I have no choice but to make under the pressure of Moon Praying Shrine. I can always explain myself." The old turtle cupped his hands together. "Your Majesty is wise." The Sea Sovereign chuckled. "Mister's flattery is too rare, so this solitude will accept it. It seems that you also appreciate this Chinyu. This solitude is the same. I originally didn't think much of it, but now I think that he is a rare talent. What a pity he isn't a member of the sea races." As the sea sovereign sighed, a carriage quietly drove into the rear courtyard of the Great Glory Casino. A tired, but still straight carriage driver leapt onto the ground, bowed to the people in front of him, and then drew back to the side. The carriage opened from the inside. An old man wearing ordinary moon-colored robes nodded towards them, a warm smile on his face. With the vice priest in the lead, all of Moon-Praying Shrine's sea folk deeply bowed their heads, their voices filled with awe and reverence. "Greetings, Lord Priest." This ordinary-looking old man, whose eyes were at most a bit spirited, was actually the high priest of Moon-Praying Shrine that shook the entire sea region, the one who truly wielded all authority. If one were to really compare them, then besides His Majesty in the royal palace, he could be considered the most honored person in the world. It was precisely this kind of big shot that had stealthily arrived at the capital city in this inconspicuous night. "Rise." "Yes." The white-dressed woman stepped forwards and took hold of her father's hand. The Lord Priest's smile became even brighter, filled with warmth. He was no different from a father who doted on his daughter. "Lord Priest, you finally arrived. According to what we know, His Majesty gave Qin you 2 days to consider. If we don't act now, then it will be too late." The vice priest had a grim expression. Chapter 184. For instance, the Council of Elders. But there were some people that were as shrewd as a fox. For instance, Moon-Praying Shrine's Lord Priest. Without any communication, he was able to see through everything just by relying on his own judgment. One had to admit that his eyes were sharp. No one objected to the Lord Priest's words. There was only obedience and joy for the holy flower that was about to be saved. The status of a priest in Moon-Praying Shrine was countless times higher than that of His Majesty in the capital city. Not only was he the holder of power, but he was also the light and spiritual teacher who guided them forward. 2 days later, the front door of the Daihatsu Casino opened. Because it was announced that the casino would be closed in advance, this noisy place was surprisingly quiet. The carriage was engraved with runes that represented Moon-Praying Shrine. A full moon hung high above the waves of the sea. As the wind blew past, the waves sparkled, reflecting countless moons on the surface of the sea. Outside the Daihatsu Casino, there were still some gamblers who didn't get the news. They were annoyed that they were turned away, but they didn't dare to do anything. Of course, there were always curses and mutterings. At this moment, seeing the carriage drive out of the casino and a large number of wolf cavalry following it, as long as one wasn't myopic, they would know that an incredible figure had arrived. Moreover, there were always those with discerning eyes. This carriage was covered with complex runes and that magnificent and eye-catching image of the moon and sea. All of these were symbols of Moon-Praying Shrine's most honored status. Perhaps only the Lord Priest had the qualifications to use it, just like the imperial robes of a mortal dynasty. The great figure who had once led Moon-Praying Shrine in direct combat against the capital city had actually come to the capital city? All of the sea folk that realized this felt their hearts surge with excitement. They didn't have any ill feelings towards Moon-Praying Shrine, and it could even be said that they had an indescribable sense of worship towards this legendary Lord Priest. Thus, their eyes filled with respect and awe, and with a bit of curiosity and longing, they bowed towards the carriage. As if sensing their thoughts, the window was pushed open from the inside, revealing the gentle face of the priest. Today, however, he was wearing a full set of priest robes. It was an ancient design, brightly colored, and there were several long feathers on his hat. However, this didn't make him look comical or ridiculous. Instead, it made him look extremely dignified. Even though he was smiling warmly, his noble and superior aura still made people feel an inexplicable sense of awe. Thus, news that Moon-Praying Shrine's priests had arrived at the capital city spread out at the fastest speed possible. The wolf riders straightened their backs, and their eyes were as sharp as blades. They carefully observed their surroundings, ready to unleash a storm of attacks the moment an accident occurred. Shuizheng sat on the sea-wolf's back. His face was still pale, and it was obvious that the severe injuries he had suffered would not be healed in a short time. Even so, no one dared to underestimate him in the least. This was a formidable existence that had fought the whale sovereign head-on and even managed to survive. The carriage drove through the long street, and under the watchful eyes of more and more people, it headed in the direction of the palace. And at this time, Qin Yu's final judgment was being carried out. The news that moon-praying shrine's priest had come to visit left many people stunned. They couldn't figure out why this old rival of theirs would so casually step into the capital city. But there were also some people who felt something different from moon-praying shrine's actions. Their complexions darkened. For instance, the whale sovereign. On that day, when Shuizheng had stopped him from killing Lin Ming, he could see moon-praying shrine's attitude. He never imagined that even the Lord Priest would personally come. Did these barbarians eat the wrong medicine? Did they come today to protect Qin Yu? On the day of ancestral worship, the whale sovereign had chosen to retreat when facing the sea sovereign. This was because he was confident that Qin Yu would die, so he had taken this chance to weaken His Majesty's prestige. This would be beneficial to him in seizing power in the future. But now, it was clear that things were spiraling out of his control. He couldn't wait any longer. Qin Yu had to die. A harsh light flashed in the whale sovereign's eyes. He took a step forwards and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, you said that you would give an explanation, and I have been waiting for this day. Now is the time for you to fulfill your promise." In the grand hall, several people's eyes burst out with a sharp light. They were all surprised. They never thought that the whale sovereign, who had always lived in seclusion behind the scenes, would actually jump out on his own initiative and challenge His Majesty. There were many smart people. As they thought back to what they had just learned about the arrival of moon-praying shrine's priest and the attack of the wolf rider commander, many people had dignified expressions. The first to stand up was the Council of Elders' great elder. There was a scar on his face that had been torn open in the past. Even though it had healed, there was still a purple-red scar left behind. "Your Majesty, the day of ancestral worship is the most important festival of my royal family. Anyone who dares to offend our ancestors must be severely punished. Moreover, I heard that he is a human?" The great elder who had been roused from seclusion smirked. The scar on his face became even more hideous. He should have been executed on the spot that day, but it was actually delayed until today. "I really don't know what your Majesty is thinking." He bowed and lightly said, "I ask your Majesty to give the order for Qin Yu to be executed, or else kill me. I only hope that the blade in your Majesty's hand won't deviate again today, because having a scar on my face is truly ugly. Even my grandson doesn't dare to let me hug him alone." In the past, when the Council of Elders was purged, the great elder had survived. Even so, he still had this scar on his face. Originally, only a few people knew of this matter. Now that he had publicly spoken of it in the Grand Hall, it was an extremely fierce question. "Did your Majesty want to carry out another purge for a human?" "I ask your Majesty to give the order for Qin Yu to be executed." "I ask your Majesty to give the order for Qin Yu to be executed." "Your Majesty, please give the order." In the Grand Hall, figures fell to their knees one after another. The air was so heavy that it seemed as if it would solidify. Several figures stood in the corners of the hall. Their auras were light and transcendent. They wore white robes, and whether it was men or women, their eyes were lowered, as if they didn't see what was happening in front of them. The whale sovereign's eyebrows furrowed imperceptibly. According to the agreement, the priests should have opened their mouths to help crucify Qin Yu to death. After all, although these people didn't have much authority, they did have a great deal of authority when it came to worshipping their ancestors. On the day of ancestral worship, the priests had already taken action, so there was no reason for them to remain silent now. Just what was the problem? As the whale sovereign was lost in thought, the sea clan sovereign on the dragon throne finally spoke up in the face of the torrential oppression. If you want to kill Chinyu, then this solitude is the same. But since he was allowed to live until today, there must be a reason. He turned and nodded. Mr. Turtle, take out the item. The old turtle's face darkened. He took out a crescent-shaped jade pendant from his chest. Before the day of ancestral worship, this is proof of identity that Moon Praying Shrine's special envoy secretly sent to the royal palace. It clearly states that Chinyu is a guest priest of Moon Praying Shrine. His Majesty and I have already carefully examined it, and the aura within the jade pendant is indeed that of Chinyu. He clenched his teeth, his voice full of anger. Otherwise, do you really think that His Majesty would have been willing to save Chinyu? Ruining the day of ancestral worship is the same as disturbing the slumber of our ancestors. For such a great crime, it wouldn't be too much to cut him to pieces. But think about it. If he dies, that is the same as the capital city killing off a priest of Moon Praying Shrine. Even if he is only a guest priest, that is an unbearable humiliation to Moon Praying Shrine. At that time, there will inevitably be a war. The old turtle paused for a moment. His sharp eyes swept over the hall. War, this is war. This is not some small skirmish between tribes on the border. Since you have the qualifications to stand here today, you should all be well aware of just what sort of strength Moon Praying Shrine possesses. If war truly breaks out, then while the capital city might be able to win in the end, the price they will have to pay will be unimaginably heavy. You, and even I myself, all of us might be buried in this war. No one thought that things would suddenly develop like this. Looking at the indignant turtle origin and the silent His Majesty, countless people groaned inwardly. With the two of you, was it really all right for you to do such a thing? Moon Praying Shrine's guest priest, stop messing around. Chinyu was a human. In a tribe that placed the most importance on tradition, it was already good enough that he wasn't killed. To even become a guest priest was simply the biggest joke in the world. But the problem was that even though everyone knew that His Majesty and Turtle Origin were putting on an act, there was no way to expose them. This was because that jade pendant was definitely real. What nonsense! Chinyu was in their hands, and with Moon Praying Shrine supporting him from the outside, wanting to secretly make preparations would be easy. Who would have thought that, in order to protect Chinyu, the dignified sovereign of the sea races would actually lie through his teeth? Many of the sea folk didn't know whether to laugh or to cry, but they also felt a chill in their hearts. It seemed that His Majesty was determined to protect Chinyu from death. Your Majesty, I do not believe your words. How can a human become Moon Praying Shrine's guest priest? A cold light surged in the whale sovereign's eyes. Moreover, even if we take a step back and say that he really is Moon Praying Shrine's guest priest, he still has to die for offending the royal family's ancestors on the day of ancestral worship. The sound of footsteps echoed in from outside the hall. The richly dressed Lord Priest walked in. He smiled, but everyone could feel the disdain and arrogance radiating from him. To answer the whale sovereign's question, who Moon Praying Shrine chooses as a guest priest is an internal matter of Moon Praying Shrine. There is no need to explain anything to anyone or obtain their consent. As for killing my Moon Praying Shrine's guest priest, the old man paused for a moment, his voice faintly fading. The whale sovereign can try. He looked up and smiled. Your Majesty, I apologize for my lack of manners. Allow me to greet you. He bowed, slightly in greeting. This scene left the high officials in the hall stunned. For a time, they even forgot the overbearing words he had just said. Moon Praying Shrine had never been on good terms with the capital city. With the status of a priest, even if he were to sit on equal footing with His Majesty, no one would say anything. But now this old man actually lowered his head and bowed to His Majesty. In that moment, many officials in the hall felt a sense of honor. The sea sovereign lifted his hands. Priest, there is no need to be so polite. Someone grant him a seat. The sea sovereign smiled as he watched the old man take a seat. He understood that this bow was because of Chinyu, and he wanted to express his thanks. Although this seemed too casual with this old man's status, for him to do this was enough to show how highly he regarded Chinyu. Just what had happened to Moon Praying Shrine? Could it be? A thought popped up in the sea sovereign's mind. After a brief moment of hesitation, he finally suppressed it. If his guess was correct, then this might be the best time to uproot Moon Praying Shrine. But he would inevitably have to pay a price.